Chapter 61. Shameless Boasting. Counts could not even be bothered to look at Feng Xinjian. In his eyes, Feng Xinjian, who had failed his job transition, could not even be compared to people like Carter and Zhou Yong. He was someone who had been eliminated, a complete piece of trash. However, what Feng Xinjian had said was not wrong. The real time for the battle had been today and not last night. It was just that when everyone saw Feng Xinjian failing his first transition last night, they subconsciously felt that he had stood them up. Class 250 SXS instructor Dick said coldly, "Feng Xinjian, you failed your job transition. You no longer have the right to continue staying in this classroom. Leave quickly and don't pester us endlessly. Also, I've already applied to the headmaster to cancel your villa and maid, as well as your monthly resources. Those resources should not be wasted like this." To think that the prefectural champion in his class had failed his first transition. If not for Kaunitz's genius performance, his situation in the academy would have been even worse. Thinking of his own teaching evaluation this year, Dick's gaze towards Feng Xinjian was filled with even more disgust. Feng Xinjian only stared coldly at Kaunitz, the provocation in his eyes clear. Although he had been focusing on his cultivation during this period of time, it did not mean that he was unaware of the rumors going around. He was not a robot, but a person who was left with only rage and hatred, as well as more negative emotions than ordinary people. It was just that in order to fully focus on his first transition, he had been unwilling to waste time on Feng Xinjian. After all, he only had slightly more than 4 years left. But now that he had finally completed his first transition, he no longer had any reservations, nor did he intend to put up with Feng Xinjian's impoliteness. Moreover, the Ice Age meditation art he was cultivating required him to advance bravely, using his martial arts to get rid of the injustice in his heart. How could he tolerate Feng Xinjian's casual humiliation? Ha! Seeing Feng Xinjian's provocative gaze, Kaunitz stood up. A violent force field swept through the surrounding air, emitting crackling sounds. Even the tables and chairs in the surroundings creaked as the air was compressed and distorted. Don't try to anger me, Feng Xinjian. The last thing you should do in your life is anger me. Kaunitz raised his chin and looked at Feng Xinjian with a condescending expression. For the sake of our schoolmates, I'll give you one last chance. Apologize and admit your mistake, and I'll let you leave with dignity. Kaunitz! Feng Xinjian's eyes narrowed slightly as he said faintly, "Say no more. Let's meet on the dueling platform." A dangerous glint flashed in Kaunitz's eyes as he took steps forward. The reduced force field was like a strong gust of wind, pressing down on Feng Xinjian's body, unceasingly pressing down on his shoulders, limbs, and spine. As you wish, Feng Xinjian. Today will be the last day you want to remember in your life. Kaunitz calculated the time and said, "Then let's meet on the dueling platform in an hour's time. I hope you don't stand me up again." With that, he smiled at Feng Xinjian with a mocking expression. He wanted to give enough time for more people to see Feng Xinjian being trampled under his feet. He wanted to let him vent his resentment from being defeated by Feng Xinjian in one move. Kaunitz wanted to let everyone know that in the entire Class 256, in this year's prefectural selection, only he, Kaunitz, was the true genius. Kaunitz turned to leave, with Barbara, Ferdinand, and the others following behind him. Barbara flashed a cruel smile at Feng Xinjian, making a throat-slitting gesture with her palm. In their eyes, Feng Xinjian was doomed today. Dick walked past Feng Xinjian and let out a cold snort. Ridiculous. His eyes were filled with disdain towards Feng Xinjian. In his eyes, Feng Xinjian had completely failed his job transition and had lost his mind, coming to the classroom to create trouble and humiliate himself. But it's good that Feng Xinjian can be chased away like this. A useless person like him who has failed his job transition will only drag down my examination results if he stays in the class. Jack and Anthony came to Feng Xinjian's side. They did not say much, only nodding and saying, "Xinjian, be careful. It's said that Kaunitz has started learning killing techniques since last month. Be careful of his reduced force field." The group headed in the direction of the dueling platform. The news that Fang Xinjian had failed his job transition and was still going to duel with Kaunitz on the dueling platform spread throughout the entire Royal Knight Academy in an instant. Along the way, many of the staff and students from the academy who saw them knew that they were going to duel. Out of curiosity, they followed along. They looked at Fang Xinjian as if they were looking at an idiot. How many years has it been? How many years has it been since there's been a duel in the academy? I had thought that since Fang Xinjian had failed his job transition, the duel would be over. Who would have thought that he would be so daring? Daring? I think it's stupidity. To challenge someone who has completed the first transition without going through the job transition. He's just courting death. When Fang Xinjian and the group slowly walked to the dueling platform, there were already over 10 knights rushing over. There were even instructors, academy staff, and staff rushing over. Seeing Fang Xinjian and Kaunitz walking over, everyone's gazes were filled with different emotions. Fang Xinjian, didn't he fail his job transition? To think that he still wants to challenge Kaunitz to a duel? Is this guy crazy? It's such a pity for Fang Xinjian. If he hadn't insisted on choosing the Windstorm Sword hero, he wouldn't be in such a miserable state. This is called overestimating one's capabilities. There were only 1 to 200 students and teachers in Cursed Royal Academy. Including the maids, cooks, craftsmen, and other staff members, there were definitely not more than 1,000 people. It was really not a big number. Therefore, the news that Fang Xinjian and Kaunitz were going to continue the duel spread throughout the academy very quickly. Fang Xinjian did not pay them any heed. After arriving at the dueling platform, he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to cultivate. He continued to cultivate his sword arts from head to toe. One could see his muscles and bones under his knight attire trembling, entangling and twisting as he circulated his sword arts in waves. More and more people rushed over, including instructors like Dick, and even Hogan from the City Guards Institution came to the dueling platform. Seeing Hogan walking over, Jack's eyes lit up and he said, "Boss, why are you here?" "Of course it's to give lessons. Although it's just a name, I'm still the Academy's instructor and have to come a few times every month." Hogan looked at Fang Xinjian, who was cultivating with his eyes closed. He had thought highly of Fang Xinjian during the prefectural selection and had even won 50 gold from a bet with Dick. Seeing how Fang Xinjian was resting with his eyes closed, he tried to persuade him, "Fang Xinjian, cultivation is not something that can be fought over. Do you want to talk to Kaunitz and the others? You should recuperate first. It won't be too late to fight with him after you've completed your job transition. Don't let your emotions affect your decisions." Anthony added, "That's right, Xinjian. There's plenty of time for a duel. Why are you in such a rush? Even if you're in a rush, you should first recuperate from yesterday's injuries." They had seen with their own eyes how Fang Xinjian had vomited a few mouthfuls of blood yesterday. "It's fine." However, Fang Xinjian abruptly opened his eyes and casually replied. He then stepped onto the arena and bellowed, "Kaunitz, come on up. Don't waste any more time." He shook the muscles all over his body, and a series of crackling sounds rang out. Then he took big strides towards the arena. His display of strength was extremely violent, but his heart was calm. He had calculated all of Kaunitz's actions in his mind and was calmly simulating the process of the battle. Kaunitz furrowed his brows slightly. Only half an hour had passed. However, although it was not in line with his plans, he was not willing to retreat at this moment when he looked at the more than 100 people below the platform. With a light tap of his foot, his entire body streaked across the air in a graceful arc as he arrived on the platform. He was wearing a blue knight attire, with 3 long swords hanging from his waist. His golden hair fluttered in the wind, and the corners of his lips curled up into a cold smile. He looked at Fang Xinjian and said, "Today, we'll have a duel. I'll let everyone know who is the true genius in this year's prefectural selection." Chapter 62. About 10 minutes before the duel between Fang Xinjian and Kaunitz was to start, Huang Lin was excitedly running towards the headmaster's office. He wanted to tell the other party that Fang Xinjian had already completed his job transition and had become a Windstorm Sword hero. However, just as he dashed into the office, the scene before him made him frown slightly. A white-haired lady dressed in luxurious clothes was sitting in front of the headmaster. The lady's brows were very thick, but her eyes were long and thin like a fox's. Her face was full of wrinkles, and she definitely did not look young. The person sitting next to the lady was the white-bearded old man who had questioned Feng Xinjian at the start of the third stage of the prefectural selection. Later on, he had been envious that Huang Lin had taken in a disciple, and in the end, he had encouraged his daughter to get closer to Feng Xinjian. When Huang Lin saw the long sword at the lady's waist, which was embedded with colorful gemstones, he frowned. Treja clan's Rebecca, why are you here? Rebecca Treja was one of the Treja clan's surviving knights. She was at level 19 of the first transition and was also Countess's aunt. Although she had not completed the second transition, she had been at the pinnacle of the first transition for decades. As a veteran first transition expert, she had tempered her attributes year after year and trained hard on her specialties. Her decades of accumulation were no small matter. Even some youngsters who had just completed the second transition and reached level 20 might not be her match. Oh, isn't this Master Huang Lin? Seeing Huang Lin enter, Rebecca smiled and said, "It's been a long time since we've met." Seeing this, the headmaster smiled and said, "Lin, you've come at the right time. Adelaide is about to retire, and we've invited Rebecca to be the Academy's sword arts instructor. You guys know her as well. She's from the prestigious Treja clan and has extraordinary sword arts. She's the most suitable person to be the Academy's sword arts instructor." Rebecca smiled and said, "Headmaster, you're too kind. Haha, we were just discussing the issue of reducing the Academy's expenses. Since Master Huang Lin is here, we can discuss it together." "Reducing expenses?" Huang Lin said coldly. "That's right. For example, prefectural champion Feng Xinjian. Since he has failed his job transition, he shouldn't be able to continue enjoying the treatment of a prefectural champion." Bellica's words were as sharp and overbearing as if she was performing sword arts. The moment she opened her mouth, she directly confronted Huang Lin. His resources could have been spent on more talented students. Huang Lin sneered at Rebecca. "Ha, like Countess? That's right. I don't differentiate between close and distant relatives. Although Countess is my nephew, he is extremely talented, completing the first transition within 10 days and pushing his waves to level 3 within 3 months. I feel that the Academy should give him more talent, allowing him to develop and grow healthily instead of wasting it on some trash." Trash. Just as Huang Lin was about to announce the news of Feng Xinjian's successful job transition, an instructor walked in and said, "Headmaster, Feng Xinjian and Countess are fighting in the dueling arena." What were they messing around about? The headmaster frowned. Rebecca, who was standing at the side, said firmly, "Countess is a very sensible child. It's impossible for him to have taken the initiative to bully others. It must be this Feng Xinjian who has offended him. However, the Academy has stipulated that one cannot intentionally cripple or injure others in the dueling arena. Master Huang Lin, you don't have to worry. Countess will at most give him a small punishment and won't do anything to him." Ha! Huang Lin could not help but laugh out loud. "Are you sure that it was Countess who gave Feng Xinjian a lesson?" Rebecca frowned. Although she was a little doubtful of his attitude, she still said, "Isn't that the case? Feng Xinjian has failed his job transition and doesn't even have a reduced force field. He's just an ordinary person. How could he possibly be able to fight against a knight who has gone through the first transition?" Huang Lin only looked at her and smiled coldly. "Then how about this? You feel that Countess is the most talented person in this batch. If Feng Xinjian were to win against him, it would prove that Feng Xinjian is stronger." "Headmaster." He looked at the headmaster and said, "Why don't we give a slot for this year's Empire's Divine Weapon to whoever wins? After all, in this batch, none of them have an Empire's Divine Weapon yet." The Empire's Divine Weapon was a super weapon specially forged by the Empire's Armory for the strong. It was a legendary weapon that could communicate with ether particles and display extraordinary powers. However, such a weapon had to be specially designed and manufactured, and it required a huge amount of resources. Usually, only students who had been recommended by each academy would have the right to obtain it, and there would only be 1 or 2 such slots every year. It could be said to be extremely precious. Although Rebecca was puzzled by Huang Lin's attitude, she merely nodded and said, "That's how it should be." Seeing that both of them had agreed, the headmaster did not object. He said, "Countess and Fang Xinjian are both extremely talented, dragons and phoenixes among men. In this batch, if there's anyone who has the right to get the Empire's divine weapon, it should indeed be between the 2 of them." "Then it's decided." Huang Lin smiled and walked towards the door. "Let's go watch the duel between the 2 of them now." Rebecca furrowed her brows as she thought to herself, "This old man, what is he trying to do? Does he really think that Fang Xinjian will be able to win against Countess, even though he hasn't gone through the first transition? Impossible, absolutely impossible." The headmaster also stood up and smiled at Rebecca. "Then let's go and watch their battle." The few of them were all powerful knights and conferred knights, either going through the first or second transition. Even if they were just moving slightly, their speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they had already arrived at the battle arena. On the arena, Fang Xinjian had challenged Countess, and the 2 of them had gone up to the arena together. On the arena, Countess looked at Fang Xinjian and said, "Today, we'll fight it out. I'll let everyone know who is the true genius in this batch of prefectural selection." Fang Xinjian said calmly, "Shut up." After Fang Xinjian said the word, Countess's countenance changed drastically. The air was torn apart, and an ear-piercing shriek rang out. He only felt strong gales gushing toward him, and darkness filled his vision. All the light seemed to have been blocked by something in that instant. Trash! A loud boom rang out. If one were to slow down time, they would be able to see Countess's mouth slowly open, his pupils contracting slightly. Fang Xinjian's right fist had punched into his stomach inch by inch, causing a part of his back to bulge out. Countess's body was sent flying backward inch by inch from the heavy blow. His reduced force field subconsciously spread out in all directions. Countless air explosions rang out, and waves of transparent shock waves flashed in the air. It was a phenomenon caused by the rapid flow of air. However, no matter how the reduced force field pushed out, no matter how much it exploded, Fang Xinjian was like a reef. No matter how the force field pressed down on his body, he was not affected in the slightest, as if a light breeze had brushed past his face. 2. It was as if Fang Xinjian's right hand had transcended the boundaries of time and space. With the enhancement from his agility attribute of over 70 points, as well as the enhancement from his specialty, which allowed him to increase his movement and action speed by over 2. For times, his right hand had completely turned into a blurry phantom. Just as Countess was hit by the punch and was sent flying over 10 centimeters away, Fang Xinjian's right hand had already moved and once again grabbed onto Countess's head. 2. After saying, "You talk too much crap," his 5 fingers, which were like steel bars, were already locked onto Countess's head. The latter's pupils were still contracting, and before he could even react to the first punch to his stomach, Fang Xinjian had already exerted force in his right arm, dragging Countess's head and slamming it toward the ground. Chapter 63. Countess's torso was still flying backward from the impact of the previous punch, but his head was once again violently grabbed by Fang Xinjian and sent crashing toward the ground. His head was facing downwards, and his body was facing upwards. In that instant, his entire body seemed to have been slightly stretched, and he let out an unpleasant groan. At the next moment, his entire face had already crashed heavily into the ground. His head crashed into the ground with a loud boom, and under Fang Xinjian's violent strength, his entire head broke through the ground. Rocks and sand flew everywhere, and after a while, Fang Xinjian was pressed directly into the ground. Fang Xinjian let out a breath, feeling extremely carefree. Looking at Countess, who was still trembling incessantly, he stepped out with one foot, directly stepping back on Countess's head, which was about to be lifted up. At this moment, Fang Xinjian looked extremely wild, but his mind was extremely calm. Under the circulation of the Ice Age meditation art, His brain was like a machine controlling his every action. Every movement of Kaunitz's body, every muscle, every slight movement of his bones were all within his grasp. And as Fang Xingjian stepped on Kaunitz with one foot, he only felt that his heart was clear and his mind was calm and comfortable. The proficiency level of the Ice Age meditation art on his stats window was increasing at an unprecedented rate. Just one or two more times, and I'll be able to level up. Fang Xingjian smiled, and his right foot once again twisted the back of Kaunitz's head. In that instant, he felt even better. Kaunitz's eyes were bloodshot. Fang Xingjian had no intention of killing or crippling him, as this was not in line with the Academy's rules. Therefore, not only was Kaunitz not seriously injured, he was even able to maintain a relatively clear mind due to his outstanding physique. But it was precisely this that made him even more furious. His eyes were so red that it seemed as if blood was about to drip out. He opened his mouth and let out a furious bellow, wanting to say, I'm going to kill you. But it was just a thought. In fact, he could not even say these words. It was because at the instant he opened his mouth to bellow, Fang Xingjian exerted force with his foot, causing his head to sink even deeper into the soil. This caused his mouth to be filled with soil, and he could not say a single word, only making muffled sounds. Fang Xingjian. Kaunitz bellowed furiously in his heart, and his raging emotions seemed as if they were going to explode his chest. All the power in his body exploded, and 4 phantom images flashed behind him. It was the technique of his job, the 6-armed Azura, which allowed him to form 4 additional arms through ether particles. The moment the 4 arms were formed, they drew out the long swords at Kaunitz's waist together with his own 2 hands. They turned into a sword net and shone, heading fiercely toward Fang Xingjian. The 6-armed Azura used ether particles to form new arms, and each arm had the same strength and speed as his own. In that instant, it was as if there were 6 Kaunitzes attacking toward Fang Xingjian at the same time. Each of them performed different sword techniques, forming layers of sword nets from all directions. As expected of the 6-armed Azura, who had the best killing ability among the 17 job transitions in the Academy. Sword light flashed, and under the illumination of this silver light, Fang Xingjian's expression did not change. He even had the energy to use his high agility motion vision to carefully distinguish which 6 sword techniques Kaunitz had performed. At the next moment, Fang Xingjian drew out his sword. A crisp clang rang out. No, it should be 6 clangs. As the speed was too fast, they became one sound. Everyone present could only feel a silver sword light piercing through the air, burning in it. The 6 long swords in Kaunitz's hands were all sent flying in that instant. Kaunitz's gaze was filled with shock. His head was being stepped on by Fang Xingjian, and he could not see anything at all. He could only feel the long swords in his hands being sent flying. However, he immediately reacted, using his reduced force field to grab hold of the 6 long swords and thrusting them toward Fang Xingjian. However, even a full-powered attack from his physical body had been sent flying by Fang Xingjian in a single breath. Moreover, now that he was using the reduced force field, a series of sounds of weapons falling to the ground rang out. Kaunitz still wanted to retaliate, but he felt an extremely violent force, as heavy as a mountain, coming down from the sole of Fang Xingjian's foot, almost crushing his head. It was only then that the fury in his eyes was replaced by terror. He did not dare to attack again, but his limbs were trembling and convulsing. Waves of suffocation and excruciating pain continued to attack his brain. Fang Xingjian's series of actions were too fast, so fast that most of the people below the stage could not see them clearly. They could only hear booming sounds, black shadows, and flashes of silver light. Kaunitz was then stepped on by Fang Xingjian, unable to move. Not only was his attributes suppressed by Fang Xingjian, but all of his actions were also grasped in his mind by Fang Xingjian, who had activated the Ice Age meditation art. There was no way for him to turn the tables. At the same time, the 2 emotions of wildness and calmness were maintained in a unique state in Fang Xingjian's thoughts, making him feel comfortable and calm at the same time. It was as if his skin could feel the flow of every breeze in the surroundings, and his feet could sense every bit of resistance from Kaunitz's entire body. His thoughts were unprecedentedly clear, and the Ice Age meditation art seemed to be activated to its limits at this moment. Barbara's mouth was agape, letting out dull sounds of as if she could not accept what was happening before her eyes. Zhou Yong and Carter looked at the scene on the stage in a daze. When they saw Fang Xingjian's cold gaze sweeping toward them, killing intent descended from the sky, as if a basin of ice water had been poured over them. The two of them cried out and retreated, not daring to meet Fang Xingjian's gaze at all. Some of the ladies even turned their heads away, unable to bear to see Kaunitz's miserable state. Jack and Anthony were also looking at this scene in astonishment. They had thought that it was possible for Fang Xingjian to win, but they had never thought that he would be able to win so cleanly. This was not a duel, but a one-sided suppression, especially the violent and cruel Fang Xingjian in the arena. He was so different from the man who was as calm as water that they had interacted with in the past. Jack laughed and said, "Good. This Kaunitz should be beaten up viciously like this." Anthony was astonished. Xingjian usually looks so gentle, but to think that he has such a bad temper. Robert's body did not move. Seeing how Kaunitz, who had defeated him, was defeated in an instant, his mind went blank. Hogan's gaze was also filled with astonishment. He looked at Fang Xingjian on the stage. He did not look like he had failed his job transition at all. His speed was so fast that it matched the descriptions in the rumors. On the other side, Dick let out a cry of astonishment. He had also thought of Fang Xingjian's unconventional speed earlier. He stared at Fang Xingjian, his voice so sharp that even he was surprised. Fang Xingjian, you've completed your job transition? You've transitioned into a windstorm sword hero? How is this possible?" With a loud boom, the crowd below the stage finally reacted. It was as if the oil in a wok had exploded. Amidst the commotion, everyone's gazes were fixed on Fang Xingjian, as if they were looking at a monster. They were all waiting for Fang Xingjian's reply. "That's right, I've already. Hurry up and let go of your leg." A thunderous bellow rang out, and a sharp aura of intersecting thunder and fire pierced through the air, slashing out toward Fang Xingjian's back. Before the sword chi arrived, the high temperature in the air had already caused Fang Xingjian's hair to curl slightly. Hints of electric currents had already caused his limbs to feel slightly numb. Fang Xingjian's countenance changed, and he stomped down heavily with both feet. A crisp gotcha sound rang out from Kaunitz's head, and he had completely fainted. Layers of the ground also seemed to have exploded, sending up smoke and dust into the sky. Meanwhile, Fang Xingjian had already appeared 10 meters away, as if he had teleported. The thunder and fire sword chi spun, but did not continue to miss its target. Instead, it changed direction and continued to blast toward Fang Xingjian. Just then, another wave of vacuum slashed across the air, colliding with the thunder and fire sword chi. After a series of explosions, both sides were destroyed. Huang Lin's voice rang out coldly. "Trying to kill my disciple? Do you want to die?" A middle-aged woman with snow-white hair, dressed in elegant and luxurious clothes, rushed up the dueling platform. She looked at Kaunitz with concern, and after noticing that there were only some cracks on his skull, which meant that his skull was fractured, but he was still alive, she heaved a sigh of relief. However, when she heard Huang Lin's voice, she instantly let out a cry of surprise and fury. "Old thing, look at what your disciple has done. To think that he wants to kill a knight from the same batch as him in the arena. According to the Academy's rules, he should have broken the tendons in his arms and legs and expelled from the Academy." Her countenance was very grim as she looked at Fang Xingjian, who was over 10 meters away, revealing hints of killing intent. Looking at Rebecca, her figure gradually overlapped with Li Shuanghua's in Fang Xingjian's mind. They were both old, equally protective, and equally vicious. His experiences in Demonic City seemed to appear in his mind once again, and his eyes began to blaze up. Fang Xingjian laughed angrily and said, "If I wanted to kill him, he would have died a few hundred times over. And who do you think you are to think that you have the right to make irresponsible remarks here? Although he was saying this, his heart was getting colder and colder. In his mind, he kept calculating Rebecca's earlier performance and the prowess of the thunder and fire sword cheese, simulating how he should fight. Shameless person. Rebecca was so angry that her body was trembling. She pointed at Fang Xingjian and said, "Headmaster, look, look. This is the prefectural champion of our batch. This kind of person doesn't respect his teachers, oppresses his fellow students, and is a little B***starred who goes against common sense. How can he be worthy of being the prefectural champion?" Huang Lin looked at Rebecca with a cold smile, slowly drawing out the black iron longsword in his hand. "Shut your mouth. If not for your sudden attack, how could Kaunitz have been injured by my disciple? Moreover, as a super genius who has successfully transitioned into a windstorm sword hero, do you think that you have the right to expel him from the academy? Old woman, don't think that I won't dare to kill you just because you're old." After saying that, Huang Lin swept out with the iron sword in his hand, slashing toward Rebecca. Chapter 64. As Huang Lin's sword swept out, it was as if the long sword had transcended time and space in that instant. A sharp chi soared up into the sky, and everyone felt a terrifying feeling as if a blade had brushed past their faces. Rebecca, who was the first to bear the brunt of the attack, felt the greatest pressure. She felt as if the reduced force field around her was being slashed apart by Fang Xingjian. She let out a gasp and retreated frantically. As she retreated, she tapped out with her 5 fingers, and streams of thunder and fire sword chi shot toward Huang Lin's longsword. However, when the thunder and fire sword chis, which had a prowess comparable to a rocket launcher, hit Huang Lin's sword, they were sliced apart like tofu and then dissipated. Huang Lin had dispersed 18 streams of thunder and fire sword chis with a single sword attack, and the sword tip was now less than 1 meter away from Rebecca's forehead. Rebecca's eyes were filled with terror. It was only at this moment that she recalled Huang Lin's identity. He was a second transition level 25 sword grandmaster, a conferred knight with the second transition job, Heaven's Slashing Greatsword, and an Azura who had killed over 10,000 enemies on the battlefield. Her strength, agility, and flexibility, which were over 100 points, exploded like a bomb. Her attributes, which had been accumulated bit by bit through her daily sword practice over decades, as well as the various heavenly and earthly treasures that she had consumed every day, as well as the accumulation of countless resources, gave her a powerful physique. Even some warriors who had just completed the second transition might not be able to compare to her. However, even with over 100 points of strength, agility, and flexibility exploding, she was still unable to escape from Huang Lin's fatal sword attack. Huang Lin watched as the tip of the sword inched closer and closer. Just as it was about to stab into her forehead, a jade-white palm appeared out of thin air and caught the tip of Huang Lin's sword. Saved in an instant, Rebecca felt cold sweat all over her body. Seeing that the headmaster had blocked Huang Lin's sword attack for her, the lingering fear, despair, and terror on her face immediately turned into soaring fury. An ear-piercing scream came from her neck, and she bellowed hysterically, "Huang Lin, how dare you?" She pointed at Huang Lin and said, "You want to kill me? You dare to kill me for this B***starred. Aren't you still alive?" Huang Lin let out a cold laugh, and with a tremble of his long sword, he drew it out from the headmaster's hand. The headmaster smiled bitterly and said, "All right, you two. It's just a little bit of a conflict. Is there need to point your swords at each other? But he wants to kill me." Rebecca screamed as she glared at Huang Lin and Fang Xingjian, her eyes filled with hatred. Killing a knight conferred by the Empire in public? This is rebellion. Huang Lin, just you wait. I will go to the Knight Association and cripple your swordsmanship. I will send you to prison and let you live in the most disgusting and dirty cesspool forever. And you, she looked at Fang Xingjian and scolded him fiercely. Little bastard, I'll make you kneel down and kowtow to Kaunitz to admit your mistake and become his slave for the rest of your life. Fang Xinjian glared at her, killing intent swirling in his eyes. He had already made this old woman his target. Beside him, Huang Lin's eyes were also slightly opened, and there seemed to be countless sword lights swirling in his eyes. He took a step forward, and an intense killing intent that seemed to have materialized gushed out towards Rebecca. Rebecca let out a startled cry, and with a flash, she grabbed Kaunitz and ran far away. In a few blinks of an eye, she had already appeared several meters away. A voice filled with hatred rang out like a night owl or a mountain ghost from deep within the mountains. The two of you, remember, this matter will not end here. Looking at the fleeing Rebecca, Huang Lin let out a cold laugh. With this kind of trash, it's no wonder that she can't complete the second transition even when she's in her 70s or 80s. With that, he turned to look at Fang Xinjian and said, however, although this old thing hasn't completed the second transition, he has been at the pinnacle of the first transition for too long. Relying on his age and countless resources, he has stacked his attributes very high. You've just completed the first transition, so you're still unable to fight them head-on. However, with your talent as a windstorm sword hero, in just 1 or 2 years, killing them will be as easy as killing dogs. Fang Xinjian nodded seriously. Your disciple understands. Looking at the conversation between the master and disciple, which was filled with killing intent, the headmaster smiled bitterly once again. The two of you really know how to create trouble for me. Could it be that the two of you really want to kill Rebecca? Huang Lin said coldly. This kind of person is just a small hill that my disciple has encountered along the way. There's no need to worry about her, even after a few years. However, if she dares to do anything unruly now, I'll dare to kill my way to the Treasure clan. The headmaster could not do anything about Huang Lin's temper, and could only turn to look at Fang Xinjian, saying amiably, Fang Xinjian, you have indeed completed your transition and become a windstorm sword hero. Saying this, his eyes were filled with excitement. The instructors, teachers, and students all looked over curiously. Earlier, when Huang Lin and Rebecca were clashing, they had already noticed them. However, with two strong experts fighting, how could they dare to get close? However, now that the battle had ended and they heard the headmaster's question, everyone immediately turned their attention to them. Fang Xinjian smiled. Suddenly, his legs turned blurry, and he said, I've succeeded. I'm already a windstorm sword hero. Seeing the blurring of his legs, everyone's expressions immediately became more solemn. More than 70% of the people present had not been able to see clearly whether Fang Xinjian had moved his right leg or his left leg. The headmaster laughed out loud. To think that in this year's prefectural selection, a rare job like the windstorm sword hero had appeared. This was truly a dazzling achievement for him. Even His Majesty, who was far away in the imperial capital, would praise him for his teachings. The quick-witted instructors at the side walked up in unison, saying, Congratulations, Headmaster. After over 10 years of meticulous nurturing of students, Curse martial art style has been strengthened. Finally, the genius Fang Xinjian has become a windstorm sword hero. The windstorm sword hero is just the beginning. With Xinjian's talent, he will become a divine-level expert in 10 to 20 years' time. At that time, the headmaster and Master Huang Lin will be the teachers of divine-level experts. We'll be able to bask in their glory as well. That's right. Our academy has been established for over 200 years, but there has never been a divine-level expert. The headmaster is truly a pioneer, a grandmaster of his generation, with students all over the world. One after another, bootlicking was done by the instructors. Their gazes of disdain, and pity towards Fang Xinjian had all turned into envy, adoration, and passion. After all, they were not fools. A windstorm sword hero, a genius who had a high chance of becoming a divine-level expert in the future. How could they intentionally go against him? To them, someone like Rebecca, who did not know what was good for her, must have turned into a fool from practicing martial arts too much. Although many of the bootlicking was a little too blatant, both the headmaster and Huang Lin had accepted it forcefully. The headmaster's smiling face, in particular, revealed that he was in an extremely good mood. The headmaster said calmly, All right. You can all disperse." He looked at Fang Xinjian as if he was looking at a rare treasure and said, "Come with me, Xinjian. You're a windstorm sword hero, so of course you can't just attend the lessons casually. We'll help you plan your future path." I remember that the windstorm sword hero has specialties that increase one's movement speed and action speed, right? It just so happens that Cursed City Lord rears over 10 wind eagles. I'll get him to send them over for you to nourish yourself. Hearing the headmaster's words, everyone present gulped. The wind eagles reared by Cursed City Lord were extremely ferocious beasts up to level 20, and were the City Lord's most treasured pets. With just a single sentence from the headmaster, he wanted to bring them over for Fang Xinjian to nourish himself. Everyone present looked at Fang Xinjian, their gazes of jealousy and envy 10 times stronger. But there was no other way. This was a windstorm sword hero, one of the only 3 in the entire Empire's history, and all 3 of them had become divine-level experts. But now, there was finally a 4th. Chapter 65. As the headmaster and Huang Lin left with Fang Xinjian, there were only a few people left in the arena. Barbara continued to stare in the direction of the arena in a daze, as if she could not believe what had just happened. She suddenly said with a sinister expression, "How is this possible? Why? Why is it that a small character like Fang Xinjian, who had crawled out from the sewers, could actually become a windstorm sword hero? Based on what? There's no why." Ferdinand let out a cold snort and said, "Barbara, wake up. Fang Xinjian is no longer someone we can afford to offend." "What?" Barbara turned and glared at Ferdinand, saying, "Coward, are you thinking of surrendering just like that? Isn't it just a windstorm sword hero? Even if he has the possibility of becoming a divine-level expert, he has yet to do so. As long as the elders of our Fei Yang Academy and your aristocratic academy can—" "Shut up, idiot. Are you trying to get your elders killed? Could it be that you have a pig's brain like that old hag Rebecca?" Ferdinand said coldly, "Fang Xinjian is already a windstorm sword hero. A genius who has gone through the first transition like this is no longer someone that our clans can interfere with. That's a matter for the important people in the imperial capital. Don't even think of instigating me to take action. Let me tell you, you'd better not get your seniors to take action. You're not venting your anger. You're trying to get them killed. Just Huang Lin alone is enough to cause chaos in your Fei Yang Academy." After saying that, Ferdinand turned and left, leaving Barbara's face alternating between shades of green and white. In the end, she could only stomp her feet and leave. Fang Xinjian and Huang Lin followed him to the headmaster's office. The moment they entered, Huang Lin went straight to the point and said, "There's no need to say anything more. The other instructors are useless. From now on, I'll be personally guiding Xinjian's cultivation every day. You just need to give me permission to use the Academy's resources. Also, quickly report the matter of the Empire's divine weapon. I wish to equip Xinjian with it before this year's practical assessment." As he spoke, Huang Lin looked at Fang Xinjian and asked, "What other requests do you have? Just tell me directly. Don't be afraid. The dean thinks highly of you." The headmaster smiled bitterly and shook his head. He looked at Fang Xinjian and said, "Xinjian, don't worry. Your cultivation from now on will be an important project of the entire academy. As long as you can get good results in the regional selection, I'll give you whatever you want." Fang Xinjian blinked his eyes, suddenly thinking of the medicinal water Huang Lin had given him last night. He said, "Those medicinal cuisines that can increase one's potential, or in other words, heavenly treasures, can the Academy give them to me? Give me a bucket every day." A smile appeared in Huang Lin's eyes. The dean's body trembled, and his expression was a little ugly. However, he still said, "Do you know how much it costs to have a barrel of that treasure every day? Even the great nobles of the imperial capital couldn't use a bucket every day. How about this? For your breakfast every day, I'll have the Spirit Awakening porridge brewed with the blood essence of 99 types of ferocious beasts. It'll be able to increase your potential by at least 500 points every day." Fang Xinjian smiled, But he continued, I also want a good weapon. He pulled out the long sword in his hand, which was already full of scratches and nicks. This sword of mine is no longer able to hold up. You can go to the armory and pick any sword you want. Right, you still don't know about the Empire's divine weapon. I'll report it to the Royal Armory, and they'll design a divine weapon for you according to your requirements. The headmaster smiled and said, Don't worry. The Empire's divine weapon is a weapon that you can use for the rest of your life. Fang Xinjian nodded. What about killing techniques? Don't worry. The headmaster waved his hand and said, You can choose any of the 26 killing techniques passed down in Cursed Royal Academy. In the short span of a few hours, the news of Fang Xinjian successfully transitioning into a windstorm sword hero had spread to every corner of Cursed like a strong gust of wind. In the Academy's residential building, the white-bearded old instructor who had once been the invigilator for the third stage of the prefectural selection, Fang Xinjian, and who was about to retire this year, pushed open the door and walked in with a gloomy expression. The moment he entered the house, his wife came up to him and said, Old man, let me tell you something. Hailong has already transitioned to level 19, and he has also mastered the specialties of 3 heads, 6 arms, and high-speed regeneration. He'll be able to pass the regional selection next year. I see that his relationship with our Li isn't bad. I think it's best that you don't object to this. Li was blushing. Although she was shy, she still said in a low voice, Father, Brother Hailong is handsome and has a good character. Now, he even has the possibility of passing the regional selection. It's really not bad. Hailong, the white-haired old man frowned and suddenly asked, I asked you to get closer to Fang Xinjian the other time. Why didn't you go? Father. Li frowned and said unhappily, that Fang Xinjian is just a poor lad from the countryside. He's ugly and dirty. How can he compare to Brother Hailong's gentleness and consideration? Moreover, didn't you say that he arrogantly challenged the Windstorm Sword hero job transition and failed it? Such a mediocre person can't even be compared to 1/10 of Brother Hailong. That's right, old man. The lady at the side said, Luckily we didn't listen to you. If we had really let Li follow that Fang Xinjian, she would have to suffer a lot in the future. I don't know what you see in someone who can't even complete the job transition. I brought Li up since she was young. I won't allow her to suffer with other stinky men. Suffer? Trash? The white-bearded old man sighed and said, You guys are really blind. Fang Xinjian has already succeeded in transitioning to a windstorm sword hero, and he even defeated Countess just now. What? How is that possible? The lady gasped in shock, her eyes shining as she said, He's really become a windstorm sword hero? The white-bearded old man said coldly, Of course. Don't even mention Hailong. That lad is at most at level 19 of the first transition. How can it be so easy to pass the heaven-defying barrier of reaching level 20 of the second transition? In a few years, he won't even be fit to carry Fang Xinjian's shoes. I don't believe it. Li who had been pampered since young, had her princess syndrome acting up. She shouted, Brother Hailong is the best. Windstorm sword hero? Brother Hailong will definitely teach him a harsh lesson during the regional selection. After he passes the regional selection and becomes a conferred knight, he'll come propose to me. The white-bearded old man was so angry that his beard blew. Look at how much you've spoiled your daughter. In the School of Sword Arts, Ogden, who was wearing the armor of the City Guards Institution, walked in. Seeing the students passing by, he greeted them. He enjoyed the respect and admiration from everyone in the School of Sword Arts. However, after failing the prefectural selection, his family could no longer afford his daily expenses and school fees. They could only ask him to find a job. Luckily, he had gotten into the top 100 in the prefectural selection and was able to find a job in the City Guards Institution. If he continued to work hard like Jack, working hard year after year, he might be able to pass the prefectural selection in 7 or 8 years. Of course, if he did not put in enough effort and was dragged down by the various temptations of the mortal world, then he might be stuck at level 9 of the zero transition for the rest of his life. Hearing the students in the courtyard continue to brag about Fang Xingzhan's achievements in the prefectural selection, he could not help but shake his head and say, "Your news is outdated. Fang Xingzhan can't do it anymore." "Can't do it? How is that possible?" A 10-year-old student shouted. "Senior Xingzhan is the prefectural champion, the current top." "That's right. He's the prefectural champion. How can he not do it? We must be like him in the future, mastering the basic sword techniques, participating in the prefectural selection, and becoming the prefectural champion." Ogden smiled and said, "You guys are still too young. So what if he's the prefectural champion?" Let me tell you, the savings of those aristocrats over hundreds and thousands of years is not something you can imagine. Do you guys know that failing the prefectural selection is just the beginning? The job transition after the prefectural selection is what determines everyone's future prospects. Treja clan's countess completed the first transition in 10 days. As for Fang Xingzhan, he prepared for 3 months but still failed to complete his job transition. This is the difference between one's background and one's wealth. Instead of staying here all day to practice your sword techniques, you might as well follow me to help young master countess run errands. He'll just reward you with some ferocious beast meat or some body tempering ointment, and that would be equivalent to 10 days of your hard work. Chapter 66. Just as Ogden finished speaking, Second Marshal Brother Lambert frowned and said, "Ogden, do you like to gossip so much? Even if Fang Xingzhan had failed his job transition, he would still be much stronger than you." That might not be the case. If he had failed his job transition, he would be a cripple in the future. I'll participate in the prefectural selection a few years later, enter the academy, and complete my job transition. Who knows? I might even be able to defeat him then. Just then, the School of Sword Arts headmaster Kyle walked in. When he saw Ogden, he frowned and said, "Since you're no longer in the School of Sword Arts Academy, don't keep coming here." Also, without waiting for Ogden to reply, Kyle continued, "Also, Fang Xingzhan has already transitioned into a windstorm sword hero, and even knocked countess unconscious in the arena." He looked at Ogden with a pitiful gaze and said, "I'd advise you to speak less of him in the future." With that, he turned and walked into his room, thinking to himself, "I didn't expect that Fang Xingzhan's talent to be so much better than I thought." Windstorm sword hero. Although it's too late now, I still have to go talk to him. A windstorm sword hero. Even the headquarters would be jealous. Thinking of this, he opened a secret box in his room, and a look of determination appeared on his face. Fang Xingzhan was brought into the depths of the academy by Huang Lin. As he walked, Huang Lin's eyes shone as he said, "Now that you've become a windstorm sword hero, that's the most solid foundation. What you need to do next is to make this foundation even stronger so that it's unbreakable and then soar into the sky. If your foundation isn't strong enough, you might be able to easily reach level 19 or even level 29, but you might never be able to reach the divine level in your entire life. Xingzhan, do you know? Your goal should be the divine level, the pinnacle. So, you must never stop at the second transition. From now on, you'll have to leave the time at night for self-study and training your attributes. During the day, I'll give you pointers on killing techniques and specialties in the morning. In the afternoon, the academy will go all out to prepare medicinal cuisine and ferocious beasts for you. These are different from what you usually eat. When the time comes, you'll need to absorb them with the help of your waves. Also, from now on, you're not allowed to kill any monsters or enemies. From now on, you have to use all your potential to increase your attributes. That way, when your attributes reach a certain limit, you can kill monsters to level up and obtain class growth. Your attributes will be at least double that of a knight of the same level. Ordinary knights don't need to do this because their talent is limited and their class growth is limited. They temper their attributes, and it might take them a few months to increase a little. If they don't level up, it will only be a waste of time, and the gains do not make up for the losses. Leveling up as fast as possible and obtaining class growth is their path. But you're different, Xingzhan. You can't level up. Your talent allows you to have more potential, allowing you to better temper your body's attributes. You can train for 1, 2, or even 3 years before you start to level up. That way, you can reduce the amount of potential and time you spend countless times. Remember this. From now on, you are not allowed to kill or injure any enemies. Fang Xingjian understood this logic. For example, with his current agility, which was over 70 points, each point of increase would require 70,000 potential points. If he were to directly level up now, for example by leveling up by 3 levels and his agility breaking through 100 points, each point of agility would require 100,000 potential points. Instead, he might as well use 70,000 potential points to increase his attributes, and then raise his class level after reaching a bottleneck, strengthening it through class growth. Therefore, he nodded and said, "Yes. All right, now I'll tell you about battles between warriors with abilities of knight level and above. Nurturing techniques nurture the body and accumulate potential points. Training techniques stimulate the body, tempering attributes, communicating with ether energy, and changing one's intrinsic quality. And killing techniques are the true killing prowess in battles. Every warrior will have a reduced force field after they complete their job transition. This is a very useful thing. Be it for detection, killing enemies, or daily life, it's very useful. Even an ordinary knight only needs to envelop himself with a reduced force field, and with the presence of a knight's attire, he would be almost invincible against ordinary people. However, a reduced force field can only unleash half of a knight's powers. Therefore, it's fine to use this to bully people who are weaker than you. However, when you meet someone who is of a similar level as you, and both of them are also enveloped in a reduced force field, you'll only be able to rely on your physical body, which is at full power. Therefore, other than those who practice with bows and arrows, close combat is how most knights determine victory or defeat. Fang Xingjian nodded to indicate that he understood. In battles after the first transition, if the strong were to fight against the weak, they could just rely on their reduced force field to crush their opponents. It was just like how he dealt with Zhou Yong, Carter, and the others. Within a 10-meter range, he would be able to knock them out with just a wave of his palm. However, if it was someone whose abilities were close to or even surpassed his, he would still have to rely on his own physical body, rushing up to face them head-on in close combat. Huang Lin continued. As for killing techniques, they are used to kill knights, confer knights, and even those empire's knights. They allow you to make use of everything you have to unleash the true prowess of extraordinary powers, increasing your killing prowess by 10-fold or even 100-fold. Every set of killing techniques can be said to be a skill that one can study and practice for the rest of their lives. For example, the ferocious thunder fire sword that old hag Rebecca performed earlier is the Trija clan's direct killing technique. Saying this, Huang Lin let out a cold laugh and said, "However, for a swordsman to perform such a killing technique, which is mainly used for long-range attacks, it's good for killing enemies who are weaker than him. However, when fighting against enemies who are of a similar level, this killing technique is useless. That old hag is too timid and only dares to bully the younger generation with her seniority and cultivation. That's why she chose such a lousy killing technique. Xingjian, let me tell you, later on when you enter the secret vault, to choose your killing technique, the Supreme Mistwind Sword Killing Technique. This killing technique is a top-notch secret technique that manipulates gang cheese and moves without a trace. It's very compatible with your Windstorm Sword hero job. Next is the Demonic Dusk and the Eternal Divine Sword. Take a look at all of these. These are the Academy's top killing techniques. If you want to learn them, you'll have to go through many tests. However, Xingjian, you don't have to. Other than that, the other killing techniques are either not sword arts or not compatible with your job. While Huang Lin and Fang Xingjian were talking, they had already passed through a long tunnel and arrived before a huge steel door. 2 heavily armored guards whose faces could not be seen stopped Huang Lin. These 2 guards looked lifeless, not like living people, but like some kind of 1,000-year-old zombie-like creature. Fang Xingjian could sense an extreme sense of danger from them. Clearly, these 2 were the guards sent by the Academy to guard the secret vault. Only one person is allowed to enter, one of the guards said to Huang Lin. The other guard came before Fang Xingjian and said, "Also, you can only borrow one book at a time. You're not allowed to copy it or lend it to someone else. You have to return it within 10 days, or you'll be charged with treason." Huang Lin nodded at Fang Xingjian and said, "Go on, I'll wait for you outside." Therefore, under the accompaniment of a guard, Fang Xingjian entered the secret vault. The entire secret vault was empty, airtight, and there was a rotten smell in the air. There were only 26 stone pillars standing erect, and on each stone pillar was a book made of some kind of metal that was neither gold nor silver. Recorded in those books were the 26 top-notch killing techniques that Cursed Royal Academy had. Each of the killing techniques here was not something that could be compared to the ones taught by the teachers in the libraries outside. Not only were they extremely difficult to cultivate, ordinary academies would also have to go through many tests in order to obtain them. However, as Huang Lin's disciple, Fang Xingjian did not face so many difficulties. Fang Xingjian looked at the many stone pillars, and the name of the killing technique was written at the bottom of each stone pillar. He walked around slowly, first taking a look at the other 3 to 4 killing techniques, and then finally walked up to the supreme Mistwind sword to take a closer look. From the beginning to the end, he picked up the secret manual and started reading it right in front of the guard. The guard at the side did not say a word. Clearly, as long as Fang Xingjian did not break any rules, he would not care what he did. Fang Xingjian looked at the supreme Mistwind sword manual in his hands. Although he had yet to fully comprehend it, his eyes were already filled with astonishment. Initially, he had not understood why killing techniques were the true killing techniques. It was because to him, nurturing and training sword techniques could also be used for battle and to kill. However, after taking a closer look at the supreme Mistwind sword, looking at the method of using all means to control the strong gales in the atmosphere, forcing the strength of one's flesh and blood to kill the enemy, only then did Fang Xingjian realize the difference between the two. The entire Supreme Mistwind Sword Manual did not contain any methods of cultivating one's character, strengthening one's physical body or spirit. Its only use was to kill the enemy, and for this, it did not hesitate to harm one's physical body, depleting one's vitality and potential. Yes, after taking a look at this set of sword technique, Fang Xingjian knew that if he were to perform the supreme Mistwind sword too many times within a short period of time, it would cause great damage to his body. However, he still broke out into a satisfied smile. It was because the supreme Mistwind sword's killing prowess was great enough, and also because it was a sword technique that Fang Xingjian loved to cultivate the most. Fang Xingjian looked at the guard at the side and said, "This is the one." Chapter 67. Tresia Knight Academy was an aristocratic academy set up by Countess's Tresia clan. Most of the students in the academy were the sons or daughters of aristocrats, officials, or wealthy merchants in Cursed. Not only did they have to learn martial arts here, they also had to learn about etiquette, language, history, and many other things. Here, they would also be able to make many connections, benefiting them greatly in the future. Under Countess's care, Vivian had started her studies in Tresia Academy 3 months ago. She seemed to be very suited to this place. With her beauty and Countess's care, she had become one of the most popular people in the entire Tresia Academy. Gently waving her golden-laid silk fan, Vivian leaned against the railing, smiling as she looked at the guys training hard in the training grounds. Beside her was a golden-haired girl who was hugging Vivian and saying, "Vivian, you're so beautiful. Look at that Laurel who just transferred back. He's the son of a wealthy merchant. And that Willis, he's the youngest son of Cursed finance minister. And Wei Duo, his elder brother became the prefectural champion 5 years ago and is now eyeing next year's regional selection. They're all mesmerized by you now. Which one are you going to choose?" Hearing the names of the 3 students, Vivian laughed in disdain. These 3 guys are always indulging in extravagance and indulging in fighting. What future prospects do they have? On the other hand, Wei Duo's elder brother was the prefectural champion 5 years ago. He's quite interesting, but the girl laughed. "I know. They can't be compared to Countess. Countess is Tresia's direct descendant. the future head of the clan. I heard that he succeeded in his job transition in 10 days and reached level 3 in 3 months. Even the clan head praised him as the strongest genius in Treasure Clan in 100 years. Even that prefectural champion, Fong Xinjian, was not his match. Vivian smiled proudly, then said in a slightly reserved manner, "Countess is not bad, but I'll have to wait until he passes the regional selection before I can agree to his request." A few more aristocratic girls arrived and started chatting with Vivian. With Countess's influence, Vivian managed to tame the group of girls. Even if there were a few girls who were dissatisfied, they didn't dare to show it. At this moment, an 8 or 9-year-old girl with 2 braids ran over with a pale face. "Not good, not good." Vivian smiled and shook her head. "What happened, little Connie? Don't panic. Have you forgotten the etiquette our teacher taught us?" The little girl who was addressed as little Connie took a few deep breaths. Her little face scrunched up, and she said anxiously, Countess is heavily injured. Lord Rebecca brought him back, and he's being treated now." "What?" Vivian immediately stood up with a frown. "How is that possible?" Countess was in the Royal Knight Academy. How could he be so heavily injured? "What is it, Connie? Tell me slowly." "It's the dueling platform. Someone fought with Countess on the dueling platform and heavily injured him." "Dueling platform?" Vivian was puzzled. "Why is there a duel?" "The duel with Fong Xinjian is today, but he has failed his job transition, so it's impossible for him to duel today." "Then who injured Countess?" "Fong Xinjian, right?" Connie said. "It's that Fong Xinjian." Connie pondered as she said, "I heard that Fong Xinjian succeeded in his job transition. He seemed to have transitioned into something sword hero." The eyes of someone in the crowd lit up. "Windstorm sword hero?" Right. Connie nodded incessantly. "That means that Fong Xinjian became a windstorm sword hero and defeated Countess in just a few moves." Vivian's eyes narrowed, and her face twitched violently. She said in a low voice, "Windstorm sword hero?" A few young ladies who were indignant about Vivian exchanged glances, and a hint of amusement flashed in their eyes. "To think that it's a windstorm sword hero? I heard that in the entire history of the Empire, there have only been 3 people who have successfully transitioned into a windstorm sword hero." "That's true. I heard that the 3 of them have all become divine-level experts." Then this Fong Xinjian will also become a divine-level expert in the future?" A young lady smiled at Vivian and asked innocently, "Vivian, I heard that this Fong Xinjian came from the School of Sword Arts. Do you know him? Why don't you introduce him to us sisters?" Vivian's countenance changed slightly. She glared at the other party, clenched her teeth, and ran outside. "I'll go check on Countess's injuries." The moment she walked out, her mind was filled with the news of Fong Xinjian becoming a windstorm sword hero. A hint of regret flashed past her heart. At the same time, in the secret chamber of the Treasure clan's clan head, Rebecca's face was flushed red, and she bellowed furiously at the Treasure clan's clan head, Countess's father, Fong Xinjian, that little B asterisk starred, must not be allowed to continue growing. This guy even wants to lay his hands on me, and he's even a windstorm sword hero. If he's allowed to continue growing, how will there be a place for our Treasure clan? The clan head's expression was cold as he quietly said, "So you laid your hands on him, and even went against Huang Lin?" Looking at her second brother's cold demeanor, the wrinkles on Rebecca's face squeezed together, and she screamed, "He's your son? Your biological son? Am I supposed to just watch him get bullied like this? When has our Treasure clan ever been so humiliated? I must kill that little B asterisk starred, Fong Xinjian, and Huang Lin, that disrespectful old thing. Second brother, let's write a letter to eldest brother. He's in the imperial capital." A crisp smack rang out. Rebecca looked at the clan head in disbelief, as if she could not believe that he would hit her in such a manner. "You muddle-headed old man." The Treasure clan's clan head said angrily, "I asked you to go to the Royal Academy, to be a teacher, to get to know other knights, to build up your connections, to strengthen our Treasure clan's reputation, and to build up support for eldest brother. I didn't ask you to go around making enemies." "What is Huang Lin's status?" He was the god of massacre in the Western Army back then. Do you know how many people in the Western Army are his sworn brothers? And how many elderly people in the imperial capital hold him in high regard? In Fang Xinjian, he has already transitioned into a windstorm sword hero at the age of 16. What kind of genius is he? It's one thing if you don't want to get on good terms with such a person, but you even offended him. You. What do you want me to say? You won't be able to get on good terms with him. From now onwards, you're not allowed to go out. You don't have to go to the academy either. I'll help you apply for leave. With that, the clan head flicked his sleeves and left, leaving Rebecca to touch her face in a daze, feeling the red palm print on it. The next moment, her eyes were filled with crazed hatred. Good. Since all of you are looking down on me, I'll settle it myself. Do you think that you're the only ones with friends? Little B asterisk starred. So what if he's a windstorm sword hero? A dead windstorm sword hero is just a dead person. Chapter 68. Speed is Power. This was the first sentence on the front page of the Supreme Mistwind Sword. The Supreme Mistwind Sword was a killing technique that pursued extreme speed. He used his sword arts to agitate the air, creating sword chis, and then stacking them together to increase his speed. This was a technique that allowed one to use sword arts to create and control sword chis. It required great strength, agility, reaction, and control. The faster the sword was swung, the greater the prowess of the sword chis. The sword chis would strengthen the user, increasing his speed. The principles behind the Supreme Mistwind Sword are extremely profound. Its foundation is to use the omnipresent atmosphere to increase the speed and lethality of one's sword arts. Huang Lin looked at the contents of the Supreme Mistwind Sword and said, Xinjian, your talent in sword arts is unrivaled, and I've never learned the killing technique of the Supreme Mistwind Sword before. Therefore, I can only give you some pointers in terms of pure sword arts principles. You'll still need to rely on yourself. Saying that, Huang Lin smiled, but I believe that if you were to cultivate on your own, you'll be able to reach great heights in this killing technique. Following that, Fang Xinjian began his days of practicing the Supreme Mistwind Sword every morning. Early in the morning, he would send out 1,000 waves of sword chis at full power. From a few hundred meters away from Fang Xinjian's villa, one could see streams of huge sword chis flying into the air along with Fang Xinjian's swings, flying out over 10 meters before gradually dissipating. Each time Fang Xinjian swung his sword to cut through the air, he could use the extreme speed of his sword to create shock waves in the air, forming streams of sword chis. These streams of sword chis slashed through the atmosphere, bringing the air currents forward and changing the atmosphere pressure. Some of the sword chis were abnormally ferocious, while others were gentle. In the end, Fang Xinjian was able to slash out unimaginable sword chis such as whirlwinds, tornadoes, air pillars, etc. These were all the miraculous phenomena caused by the Supreme Mistwind Sword slashing through the air and vibrating the atmosphere. However, they were all created purely from sword chis, allowing Fang Xinjian to rely on his unrivaled talent to continuously master them at a rapid rate. 1,000 streams of sword chis took an hour, and Fang Xinjian also depleted all of his energy. His entire body was aching all over, and even his internal organs were in discomfort. This was due to the killing technique forcing the physical body, causing hidden injuries in the small blood vessels and even in the heart. Without Fang Xinjian's attributes, one would not be able to use this killing technique. Therefore, the academy would not provide this killing technique to ordinary students. Killing techniques did not increase one's attributes, nor did they give any specialties. They had no effect on strengthening one's foundations. Their only use was to kill people. This was also the reason why Fang Xinjian had only learned the Supreme Mistwind Sword. Rather than splitting his attention, he might as well focus on improving this killing technique, which was most suitable for him. After all, he didn't have much time left. Next, he started to eat breakfast. Countless ferocious beasts had been brought by the academy's upper echelon, medicinal herbs that had been dug out from deep in the mountains, and of course, the 10 wind eagles that the headmaster had captured from Cursed City Lord's house. Cheese. Miskies. These miskies. Every morning, Fang Xingjian would eat a big bowl of wind eagle soup and meat. The taste was extremely delicious, melting in his mouth. The silk-like texture, mixed with a fragrant taste, lingered in his mouth and esophagus. Of course, being delicious was only one aspect. The most important thing was that these wind eagles were too nutritious. The headmaster reckoned that after Fang Xingjian ate these 10 wind eagles, his agility attribute would increase by 1 to 2 points. It would also help him recover his energy and get rid of his hidden injuries. Of course, being delicious was only one aspect. The most important thing was that these wind eagles were too nutritious. The headmaster reckoned that after Fang Xingjian finished eating these 10 wind eagles, his agility attribute should be able to increase by 1 to 2 points. It would also help him recover his stamina and get rid of his internal injuries. After breakfast, the 2 night instructors used their reduced force fields to massage Fang Xingjian's muscles and tendons, helping him circulate his vital energy and blood, get rid of his fatigue, and treat the injuries he had sustained from cultivating the killing technique. Then, they started their cultivation. This was a treatment that even the headmaster had never received before. Many people were so envious that they were going crazy. On the training grounds, Fang Xingjian moved about rapidly, slashing out with his sword. Each slash tore through the air, pushing the flow of air currents and creating all sorts of sword cheese. However, these sword cheese were different from the ones in the morning. These sword cheese curved, extended, and leaped about, almost as if they were chasing and circling around Fang Xingjian's body. It was as if a tempest had surrounded Fang Xingjian. Not only did they increase Fang Xingjian's speed, but they also contained an astonishing destructive prowess. Each sword cheese brushed past the ground, leaving behind a sword mark that was several inches deep on the marble. Next, there was medicinal cuisine and ferocious beast essence to replenish the depletion of his vital energy and blood, as well as the damage to his organs. After that, it was practical training. Sometimes it would be other night students, sometimes it would be the instructors, and sometimes it would be Huang Lin. On the huge square, strong gales blew, surrounding Fang Xingjian's body, causing his figure to be drowned in the strong gales as he continued to flash around Huang Lin. Huang Lin held onto his black metal longsword, not moving at all. Each time he attacked, he would send Fang Xingjian, who was flashing around him, flying away. However, with the specialty single sword world subjugation, Fang Xingjian's speed was too fast when he performed the supreme Mistwind sword. It was as if he had instantly turned into several tens of human silhouettes, riding on the strong gales and appearing again and again around Huang Lin in a flash. Boom, 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 boom. Each time Fang Xingjian appeared, the 2 swords would clash, creating a loud sound. Then, Fang Xingjian would instantly disappear, appearing at the back of Huang Lin's head along with the strong gales, once again striking out with his sword, bringing along layers of whirlwinds. With a loud clang, this sword was once again blocked by Huang Lin. The long sword in Fang Xingjian's hand was bent into an arc under the pressure of the 2 tremendous forces, and then disappeared together with Fang Xingjian in the strong gales. Dang, 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 dang. A series of metallic clashing sounds rang out incessantly, and a series of sparks flashed amidst the strong gales. It was the phenomenon of their long swords continuously clashing at high speed. In the process of performing his sword arts, Fang Xingjian only felt that the muscles and bones throughout his body were being pressured by an increasingly great force. It was the power he had unleashed, and it was also the atmosphere of pressure that was surging at high speed. His Sonido sword zephyr waves circulated crazily, relieving the fatigue on his body and increasing the strength of every inch of his skin. His Ice Age meditation art circulated at high speed, allowing him to continuously analyze the movement of every air current, the circulation of every inch of his muscles and bones, circulating the supreme Mistwind sword to its limits. When performing killing techniques, not only would one kill the enemy, but they would also cause damage to one's own body. It was just like how a boxer punched a sandbag. Running would injure one's knees, or lifting weights could easily injure one's spine. While killing techniques forced the user's physical body, waves, and mental cultivation method to injure the opponent, it was also a huge burden on the user. Their figures continued to cross paths, and finally, with a soft bellow from Huang Lin, the reduced force field burst forth, sweeping away all the strong gales in the surroundings. Fang Xingjian came to a stop, panting lightly. In his hand, the long sword he had been practicing with today had once again broken into two. Ordinary weapons could no longer withstand the pressure from his strength. Huang Lin's eyes shone as he looked at Fang Xingjian and said, "Xingjian, your talent is really..." He shook his head. "It's as if you've been cultivating for decades. With each slash, the sword cheese and sword gusts make your speed increasingly faster. At the highest, it has increased your movement and attack speed by 2 times. If you were to cultivate the supreme Mistwind sword to the maximum level, given enough time, your attack speed would probably be above mine. This won't do." Fang Xingjian shook his head. "I still don't have enough control. As long as I continue to perform the supreme Mistwind sword, it will be able to continuously increase my speed with sword cheese until I can't react, control it, or my body's attributes can't keep up. Right now, I can only increase my speed by 2 times. This is far from the limits of my body. It's just that I'm not skilled enough in this sword technique." Huang Lin stroked his chin and said, "Your talent in sword arts is outstanding enough, but your understanding of wind is limited. From now on, you might have to start thinking about this." Fang Xingjian nodded. "The faster my speed, the stronger the prowess of the supreme Mistwind sword cheese. The stronger the prowess of the sword cheese, the stronger the boost to me. Then, my speed will be faster, and my sword cheese will be stronger. This is a sword technique that pursues speed, and at the same time, gets stronger as the battle progresses. Physical strength, control, strength, speed. I still have too many areas to improve." Chapter 69. Seeing how Fang Xingjian was behaving, Huang Lin shook his head. "Xingjian, aren't you being too anxious? Your current achievements are already something that many people will never be able to achieve in their entire lives. You're still young, so there's no need to be so anxious. Many a time, being too anxious will lead to failure. Be more steady, take it slow, and build a solid foundation. Only then will you be able to achieve greater things in the future." Hearing his words, how could Fang Xingjian not know that this was the correct answer? However, he really did not have much time left. He opened his mouth, but still did not say anything. Huang Lin threw him a strange look and said, "Xingjian, is there something on your mind?" At this moment, Fang Xingjian suddenly had a desire. He wanted to use the remaining 5 years of his life. Within these 5 years, he wanted to become strong enough to go back and seek revenge on Caroline. He wanted to return to Demonic City's Fang clan and question Li Shuanghua about how his mother had died. However, at the next moment, the Ice Age meditation art was activated and rationality and calmness once again took over a large part of his consciousness. He slowly let out a breath, shook his head, and said, "It's nothing. Teacher, I'd like to rest alone." Huang Lin nodded. "You can rest. This morning's training has ended. After lunch, make some preparations. In the afternoon, you'll have to soak in the secret medicine. These are all good things that the headmaster has personally prepared for you. With the Academy's financial resources, it can only last for a month." With that, he headed for the door, saying, "Xingjian, I'm your teacher. If you have any worries or troubles, you can look for me anytime." It was a pity that Fang Xingjian's mind was now completely occupied by rationality and calmness. There was no way he would take the risk of revealing his secret. He only nodded and said, "Don't worry, teacher. I'm fine." After Huang Lin left, Fang Xingjian rested for a while and then looked at his techniques column. Supreme Mistwind Sword. The faster the speed, the stronger the sword cheese. The stronger the sword cheese, the faster the speed. The Wind Shadow Sword Divinity has already given me extreme speed, but there's also boundaries negation. As long as I perform this skill, my speed can be further increased. Then, As he spoke, he walked toward the weapon rack at the side and changed to a brand new longsword. Ever since he had found out about Boundaries Negation, Fang Xingjian had accumulated 30,000 potential points in his body. This allowed him to perform Boundaries Negation for a total of over 30 seconds. In the next moment, Fang Xingjian had already activated Boundaries Negation. In the blink of an eye, he sensed an omnipresent, restless energy in the air. It was the power of ether particles. They gushed into his body like seething currents, and at the same time, the vital energy and blood in his body also erupted crazily. Every one of his muscles and tendons swelled as if they were inflated. Then, they erupted with an astonishing ability to contract, causing his speed to increase rapidly. Fang Xingjian took a light step forward. In that instant, he felt as if the air around him had become as viscous as water. With this step, he seemed to need to use 10 times more strength than what he had used previously. He knew that this was an illusion, but he did not persist in this illusion. Therefore, he moved, executing the Supreme Mistwind Sword. However, it was different from before. This time around, with the Supreme Mistwind Sword being executed, the speed had reached an unimaginable level. The air had turned into a viscous liquid, and with each step he took, he felt as if the entire world was pressing down on every inch of his skin. The sword in his hand shone brightly, and the shadow of the sword could not be seen at all. With a slash, violent sword cheese charged out like an atmospheric dragon, creating a long trench in the ground. However, before the sword cheese hit the wall, Fang Xingjian had already caught up with them with a single step, and with a bang, he scattered them. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. With a light wave, over 100 streams of sword cheese shot out, each of them as if they were slashes at full power. Fang Xingjian's silhouette flashed continuously, scattering the streams of sword cheese one after another. This had already surpassed Fang Xingjian's speed by 2 times, and surpassed the limits of the Supreme Mistwind Sword which he had performed previously. The air currents in the training room seethed, and the entire room seemed to be swaying. Streams of atmospheric dragons were like tamed dogs, prostrating around Fang Xingjian, continuously increasing his speed. He only felt as if the surrounding light and shadows were in a mess, flashing about. His speed continued to increase, and the pressure on the long sword in his hand also increased. He continued to slash through the air, bringing the Supreme Mistwind Sword to surround the sword, increasing its speed. Streams of whirlwinds circled around it, as if it was the sword of the King of Wind that ruled over all the atmospheric flows. In the next instant, Fang Xingjian felt as if there was a boom ringing out all over his body, and clouds of white air currents encompassed the sword from top to bottom. That was a sonic boom cloud. Fang Xingjian had once seen it on a supersonic plane. Although the white clouds on the sword were very faint, it still showed how terrifying the longsword's speed was. Strong shock waves surrounded the longsword, sending out wave after wave. They carried with them an extremely strong kinetic energy, enough to produce a terrifying destructive prowess. At this moment, Fang Xingjian's existence could no longer be seen with the naked eye, and his hearing and touch were no longer able to sense his movements. Fang Xingjian's silhouette seemed to have completely disappeared amidst the raging winds. Only his steel long sword remained, turning into a black line as he performed the Supreme Mistwind Sword, dancing about amidst the raging winds. His body seemed to be able to freely appear at any place at an extreme speed. It was as if he had turned into the wind, performing the long sword in his hand. He only needed to consider the flow of the sword, allowing the prowess of the Supreme Mistwind Sword to reach an unbelievable level. With a bang, the long sword exploded, and the raging winds ceased. Fang Xingjian's silhouette gradually appeared. The sonic boom cloud only lasted for a short 10 seconds or so before it completely disappeared. Hundreds and thousands of sword cheese and shock waves accompanied the explosion of a long sword, slashing out in all directions. The ground of the training ground was slashed open with countless cracks. Under the condition of using Boundaries Negation, my speed has increased by more than 2 times, reaching the limits of the supreme Mistwind sword. And then I only need about 10 seconds or so. With the help of the supreme Mistwind sword cheese, I'll be able to increase my speed by another 2 times, breaking through the speed of sound. If my physical strength is stronger and I have enough potential, allowing me to continue increasing my speed. Thinking of the prowess that could be produced, Feng Xingjian felt a surge of longing. It was a pity that there were still too many practical factors limiting the prowess of the supreme Mistwind sword. However, as long as he had a sufficiently sturdy weapon to withstand the force and wind pressure, sufficient physical strength to move at high speed, and sufficient potential to perform boundaries negation, Feng Xingjian himself had no idea how fast he could accelerate himself with the supreme Mistwind sword. Supersonic speed? Supersonic speed? 2 times the speed of sound? 3 times the speed of sound? Feng Xingjian did not know, but he knew that as long as he was given enough potential, he would have no fear even if he were to fight against Rebecca, that old hag whose strength, agility, and reflexes were all over 100 points. If he could continue to increase the speed of the supreme Mistwind sword to 3 times the speed of sound, then it would only be a matter of killing Rebecca with a single slash. Potential. I need to accumulate more potential. And the longsword. I don't know when the Empire's divine weapon will be ready. Ordinary steel longswords will not be able to withstand my strength and wind pressure. But after performing boundaries negation, my abilities will increase exponentially. This is a skill that the Windstorm Sword hero doesn't have. Unless I have no other choice, I'd better not perform it. And every time I perform it, I'll deplete my potential. This skill cannot be leveled up either, so it's better not to perform it. And there's also the supreme Mistwind sword. If I can raise this sword technique to the maximum level within 1 or 2 months, I wonder what kind of surprise it will bring me. Just as Feng Xingjian was deep in thought, there was a knock on the door. Lord Xingjian, teacher Kyle from the School of Sword Arts, requests an audience. Do you have time? Kyle? Feng Xingjian tilted his head, took a towel from the side, and wiped the perspiration off his forehead, saying, I'm going to have lunch now. Get him to wait for me in the dining hall. In the personal dining hall that the headmaster had specially set up for Feng Xingjian, a large table of dishes had already been prepared. The main dish was a fish soup made from a huge, carnivorous, ferocious sea fish. Feng Xingjian took a small bite, and his brows twitched slightly. With a single bite, he felt a strong fragrance explode in his mouth. The taste was strong but not greasy, and there was a faint fragrance hidden within. That fine texture and fresh taste made him feel as if there was a fish jumping around in his mouth. This fish soup is very delicious, Feng Xingjian said. The attendant at the side introduced. This was specially prepared by the headmaster from the Aristocrat Academy's head chef. Using a special method, it was mixed with spring onions, egg yolk, and pickled cabbage. It was specially prepared for you, Lord. After finishing the fish soup in big mouthfuls, Feng Xingjian felt a surge of vital energy and blood running amok in his body. Looking at the potential points on his stats window increasing bit by bit, Feng Xingjian suddenly felt a sense of joy. Just then, a servant brought Kyle over. As Feng Xingjian ate the fish soup in big mouthfuls, he said, Teacher Kyle, I'm a little pressed for time. If you don't mind, I'll talk to you while I eat. It's fine, it's fine. Kyle smiled, not minding it. His gaze swept across the dishes on the table, and he could not help but swallow his saliva. All of them are ferocious beasts and precious medicinal herbs. Just this meal alone would make me go bankrupt. The Academy is really willing to put in a lot of effort. So, teacher, what's the matter? Feng Xingjian picked up a big mouthful of medicinal herbs and ate them. With that one mouthful, he felt a cooling sensation spreading from his mouth to his stomach. His entire body felt cool, and his potential points increased by 10 points in an instant. Kyle gave it some thought and said, Xingjian, what do you think of the relationship between the Empire and the factions? Feng Xingjian said without hesitation, the Empire is the biggest and strongest faction. Just like this table of dishes, even if an ordinary faction were to treat a second transition expert, they might not be able to provide this every day, right? And now, I can eat 6 meals a day like this. Kyle smiled bitterly. He knew that Fang Xingjian had already understood the reason for his visit, so he decided not to be secretive and said straightforwardly, Xingjian, you're an apprentice of the School of Sword Arts to begin with. It's just that in the past, I wasn't able to tell that your talent had reached such a level, to the point where you've even transitioned into a windstorm sword hero. But during this period of time, you've more or less understood. Although the Empire is strong and prosperous, no matter how talented the commoners are, they can only become the subordinates of the royal family and aristocrats, listening to their orders. You no longer have freedom. But if you were to join the School of Sword Arts with your talent as a windstorm sword hero, I can recommend you to be a candidate for the headmaster position. With that, he took out a stack of books and said, this is the School of Sword Arts Treasured Manual, the cultivation method for the first level of the Galaxy Creation Sword Technique. It's the #1 killing technique in the School of Sword Arts, and definitely surpasses all the killing techniques you're currently cultivating. As long as you're willing to join the School of Sword Arts, he's yours now. Chapter 70. Faced with Kyle's words, Fang Xingjian did not reply immediately. Instead, he took 3 big mouthfuls of the fragrant and delicious fish soup in the pot, finishing it in one go. Seeing that his potential points had increased by over 50 points, he wiped his mouth and said. He took a look at the manual on the table. He knew that he might be able to pick up the first level of this killing technique by just skimming through it. However, he did not pick it up in the end. It was because the current him no longer needed the first level of a killing technique. If he still had a few decades of lifespan left, it would be a good idea for him to be encyclopedic knowledge and integrate the sword techniques of various factions. However, to Fang Xingjian, who only had 4 years and 3 months left, the fastest way was to specialize in one type of sword technique and walk all the way to the pinnacle. Therefore, he paused for a moment before saying, Teacher Kyle, the Empire is the strongest faction, but the factions are also the weakest empire. You said that I don't have freedom in the Empire, but if I were to join the School of Sword Arts, would everything be good? I can guarantee that. Kyle wanted to say more, but was stopped by Fang Xingjian with a wave of his hand. Teacher Kyle, the price of freedom is to be in dire straits like you are now, right? Fang Xingjian saw the change in Kyle's expression, but he did not stop. As he swept away the delicacies on the table, he said quickly, if I want to obtain something, I naturally have to pay a price. If I want to obtain other people's resources and support, it's normal for me to pay a little bit of freedom. It's the same for the Empire, and it's the same for the School of Sword Arts. I don't believe that the School of Sword Arts will invest their resources on me without asking for anything in return. Even if some people won't, with so many members of the School of Sword Arts upper echelon, their families, relatives, and disciples, would they agree to it? Talent cannot obtain true freedom no matter where they go, and it's even more so for geniuses. Even if I become the School of Sword Arts head, is there nothing that can restrict me? Therefore, a bargaining chip like freedom is not attractive to me. And in terms of resources, the School of Sword Arts will never be able to match up to the Empire. Kyle frowned and said, what you say might make sense, but you've never seen how dark the fights between the Empire's upper echelons are. Without any background, if you were to go there recklessly, Mr. Kyle. Fang Xingjian stopped eating. He looked up at Kyle and said, believe me, I've seen too much darkness and despair. But now, I'm confident that with my own sword, I'll be able to slash through them all. Kyle stared at him. The two of them stared at each other for a while before Kyle sighed. Your heart is firmer than mine. You're more suited for swordsmanship than I am. Fang Xingjian lowered his head and continued to eat. His mind was cold, but his words were flawless. He tried to imitate the tone of an ordinary person and said, I thank you for enlightening me. So, if there's anything you need my help with, as long as it's within my power, I will do it. Kyle sighed. I'm going to participate in the Sword Hero Battle next month. Whether I succeed or fail, I won't be coming back. Fang Xingjian nodded and then heard Kyle continue. What I'm most worried about are those disciples in the dojo. I've temporarily handed over all the matters to Lambert. If he's in trouble, I'll still need you to help me take care of him. Fang Xingjian said calmly, Don't worry, I'll do it. Thank you. Kyle left. There seemed to be a hint of understanding in his eyes, but there also seemed to be an even deeper sense of desolation. Fang Xingjian did not know if he would be able to pass the sword hero battle. The only thing he could do was to take good care of himself and make himself stronger. After dinner, he was brought to a bedroom by the servants. Before he entered the room, he could smell a strange fragrance from afar. Fang Xingjian took in a deep breath and felt a refreshing feeling that he had never felt before wash over his entire body. Even his mind seemed to have cleared up a little. Opening the door, the strange fragrance became even more intense. It assaulted him, as if it had invaded every single cell in Fang Xingjian's body. It made him feel as if all the fatigue in his body had been swept away. The headmaster and Huang Lin had been standing inside for a long time. They looked at the water bucket that was as tall as a person and the pitch-black medicinal water that was continuously being heated up. The headmaster said, "Take off your clothes and go in." Fang Xingjian did not hesitate and took off his clothes, walking into the water bucket. Circulate your waves and mental cultivation method. Don't stop. Absorb the medicinal effects to your heart's content, Huang Lin said. Fang Xingjian had been circulating his waves for 24 hours to begin with. Now, there was no problem at all. Every muscle and bone in his body started to move at an extremely fast speed. However, his state of mind was still clear, maintaining his calmness and rationality. With the circulation of the waves, he felt as if the medicinal water in the surroundings was boiling. Streams of aura that were like flames were crazily drilling into his body, as if they wanted to incessantly burn his organs, his blood vessels, and his nerves. Bear with it, the headmaster said. This is a medicinal herb ground using the Lulan beast as the main ingredient. The Lulan beast is born with the ability to communicate with ether particles. Every drop of blood and every piece of flesh in its body is tainted with a large amount of ether particles energy. Right now, we're combining various medicinal herbs to allow you to absorb the essence of the Lulan beast and modify your body, allowing you to have the recovery ability, endurance, and body's toughness of ferocious beasts. As he looked at the pained expression on Fang Xingjian's face and the streams of black aura dissipating from the surface of his body, a hint of heartache flashed on his face. Even with the Academy's financial resources, we can only sustain such treatment for a month. During this month, you'll have to soak in this medicinal water every day. If you're lucky, not only will it increase your endurance attribute, it'll also allow you to obtain the specialty berserkness. Do your best to absorb it. Don't waste a single bit. Fang Xingjian nodded. His breathing and blood continued to circulate according to the sonido, sword zephyr waves. He could sense an increasingly strong, scorching aura penetrating into his body, as if it was going to melt all of his flesh and blood into nothingness. The headmaster looked at Fang Xingjian. While his heart ached for the medicinal water, his eyes shone brightly. Good. I've put in so much effort to reduce the Academy's expenses for the next 3 years, all for the sake of Fang Xingjian to be able to produce results. As long as he can become the champion in the regional selection, or even become a divine-level expert in the future, all of this will be worth it. Regional champion, national champion, and a divine-level expert from Cursed Royal Academy. Just the thought of it made the headmaster extremely excited. Eat as much as you can. Even if I have to pile up, I'll pile you up until you become the regional champion. Just like that, Fang Xingjian cultivated his sword arts, waves killing techniques, and consumed all sorts of medicinal food and ferocious beast essence every day. With an unprecedented attitude, the headmaster invested a large amount of resources in him. Huang Lin sparred with Fang Xingjian every day, continuously sharing his comprehensions in sword arts and various experiences in executing them to Fang Xingjian. Regardless of whether it was his attributes, specialties, or techniques, Fang Xingjian continued to grow at an unprecedented speed, becoming stronger and stronger. Of course, throughout this process, Huang Lin and the headmaster protected Fang Xingjian closely, not allowing him to be disturbed in the slightest. They also prevented him from having the chance to kill any monsters, preventing him from leveling up prematurely and wasting his potential by gaining job progression. 1 month later, just as Fang Xingjian was improving by leaps and bounds every day and night, on a hill on the Empire's west coast, a long-haired man dressed in night attire was looking at a small town thousands of meters away. Suddenly, he turned his head, looked at the adjutant beside him, and said, "What did you say? Windstorm Sword Hero?" "That's right." An adjutant who was also dressed in night attire said, "According to reliable information, Fang Xingjian has successfully transitioned into a Windstorm Sword Hero." Chapter 71. Windstorm Sword Hero. I remember that there weren't many first transition jobs like this in the Empire's history, right? Yes, there have only been 3 in the Empire's history, and none of their descendants succeeded. Hearing his subordinate's report, the long-haired man's eyes flashed, and he said calmly, "I didn't expect that a small sapling I casually planted could grow into a towering tree. How interesting." The subordinate's expression changed, and he asked, "Sir, do we need to ask the second prince?" "There's no need for that for now. Let the other clans test him out first." With that, the long-haired man took out a cylindrical object the length of an arm and placed it before his eyes. He squinted his eyes and said, "This thing is really interesting. A distance of a few hundred meters is like looking at a few meters away." The subordinate said, "This thing is called a telescope. I heard that the second prince found it while he was on his way to study. His Majesty has already given the order to manufacture it at full force, striving to equip all the members of the Night Order with it." Nodding, the long-haired man smiled and said, "The prey has entered the cave. Let's go." As he spoke, a slight breeze blew past. Behind the long-haired man, a blood-red cape fluttered in the wind, looking like a burning blood-red flame. It was an equipment exclusive to the Empire's conferred knights. It represented the power of a second transition conferred knight, as well as the glory of a conferred knight chosen from countless knights. It was a scarlet cape specially made by the Empire's armory. At the same time, with the long-haired man's command, over 100 silhouettes dashed out, charging towards the small city like sharp arrows. The long-haired man's lips curled up into a bloodthirsty smile. "Let's go. Kill them all." In the Night Academy, after a month of training, Fang Xingjian had been going all out on his sword arts, waves, mental cultivation method, and all other aspects. Coupled with the fact that he had been continuously fighting ferocious beasts and heavenly and earthly treasures, as well as having a great expert like Huang Lin feeding him moves and imparting his experience, his abilities had improved by leaps and bounds. As for his waves, as he circulated his sword techniques 24 hours a day, his experience points were constantly rising crazily. Although he did not have enough talent in the area of waves, and each level required a large amount of experience points, he had still managed to raise his Sonito Sword Zephyr Waves to level 3 within a month, gaining an increase in his strength by 3 points, 6 points in agility, 3 points in reaction, 3 points in endurance, and 3 points in flexibility. Apart from that, cultivating his sword technique 24 hours a day allowed him to squeeze out his potential and temper his attributes. In terms of the Ice Age meditation art, Fang Xingjian had relied on counts to clear away the distracting thoughts and injustice in his heart. In addition to this 1 month of polishing, he had finally leveled it up to level 2, allowing his thinking and calculation abilities to increase once again. As for the Supreme Mistwind Sword's killing technique, because it involved waves, mental cultivation methods, ether particles, and the flow of the atmosphere, this killing technique was indeed more complicated and profound than any of the sword techniques that Fang Xingjian had cultivated in the past. Thus, after a month of training, he had only reached level 18, not the maximum level. Of course, due to the fact that killing techniques had no benefits to the body, he did not gain any additional attributes even after reaching level 18. However, the level 18 Supreme Mistwind Sword, with its exquisite control over the body and air currents, allowed Fang Xinjian to continuously increase his speed to more than 3 times that of his original speed. However, although there were no additional attributes, the level 10 Supreme Mistwind Sword still allowed Fang Xinjian to have a finer grasp over the flow of air. This allowed him to condense high-speed air currents on his sword when he slashed through the air, creating a sword light several feet long. It was as though it was a piece of cake for him to slash through gold and jade. Within the medicinal tub, Fang Xinjian stood up slowly. The medicinal liquid, which had originally been as black as ink, had now become almost colorless. He could feel that the energy throughout his body had reached an unbelievable level, and waves of scorching essence chi were flowing around his body, as if they would explode at any moment. Under the stimulation of the medicinal effects, his body had become even stronger. Much of the nutrients and energy had been stored in every corner of his body, waiting to be unleashed at the moment of need. This made Fang Xinjian feel as though he had an inexhaustible amount of energy. Fang Xinjian stretched out his hand, and the attendant at the side handed him a dagger. He took the dagger and lightly sliced his finger. A wound suddenly appeared, but just as a drop of blood dripped out, Fang Xinjian tightened his finger's muscles slightly, and the wound closed up under his exertion of force. A few minutes later, a scab had formed. Not only had his abilities increased crazily, but his attributes had also increased tremendously. Soaking in medicinal liquid every afternoon for a month, the financial expenditure that had almost made the headmaster cry had also finally allowed Fang Xinjian to obtain the specialty elementary berserkness, which allowed him to have extraordinary recovery abilities. Ordinary cuts and scrapes from swords and sabers would scab almost in the blink of an eye, and they would recover completely within 3 hours. Now, with his control over his muscles and blood, ordinary external injuries were almost negligible. Other than that, the medicinal effects had given him an astonishing amount of stamina. His breathing was now very long, and the endurance of his muscles was terrifying. If he were to only use ordinary sword techniques, he would have no problem fighting for 3 days and 3 nights. Even if he were to use the Supreme Mistwind Sword, he would have to use it for 4 hours before his stamina would be depleted. With that, Fang Xinjian's attributes became: name Fang Xinjian, age 16, occupation Wind Shadow, sword divinity level 10 strength, 51 plus 4 agility, 79 plus 4 reaction, 50 endurance, 43 flexibility, 43. The attributes above come into effect once the Sonido Sword Zephyr Waves is activated. Due to perfect muscles, plus 4 in strength and agility, 10% of the endurance attribute. Nurturing sword techniques, 31 sets training, sword techniques, 4 sets supreme, Mistwind Sword level 18 specialties. Genius swordsmanship, elementary survival instinct, internal healing, internal training, sword specialist, high agility motion vision, heightened reflexes, perfect muscles. Elementary berserkness potential, 8,500 point increase, /day waves, level 3 Sonido, sword, Zephyr, waves mental cultivation, method level 2 ice. Age meditation art right now. When he performed the Supreme Mistwind Sword, he would be able to increase his speed by 3 times in just a few minutes. There was even a 3 feet sword light formed from the high-speed air currents on his sword. If he were to use Boundaries negation, even he himself would be shocked by his battle prowess. But it's still not enough. At least the Rebecca from that day, with her over 100 points in strength, agility, and other attributes, she would still be able to suppress me. After all, Rebecca was a veteran expert at the pinnacle of the first transition. Moreover, with the support of the Treja clan, she had been fed with all sorts of heavenly and earthly treasures over the past few decades, as well as countless ferocious beasts. Coupled with the accumulation of time and the enhancement from the waves, she had attributes that far surpassed that of ordinary knights. Veteran first transition experts like her, as well as those who had gone through the second transition, were not rare in the Empire. However, to Fang Xinjian, such people were just a waste of resources. But if I were to use Boundaries negation, what are my chances of winning? Right now, Fang Xinjian had 50,000 potential points and could perform boundaries negation at any time. This was because he had tested it once. Using 50,000 potential points to perform boundaries negation for 50 seconds was his current limit. If he were to continue performing it, his physical body would probably collapse. And after performing it for 50 seconds, he would not be able to perform boundaries negation for at least a day. It was a pity that Fang Xinjian had not seen Rebecca's limits. Therefore, although he estimated that after using boundaries negation and the supreme Mistwind sword for 20 seconds, he would be able to continue battling at supersonic speed for another 30 seconds, he was not sure if he would be able to win against Rebecca within these 30 seconds. However, excluding Rebecca, an old monster who had been at the pinnacle of the first transition for decades, ordinary first transition knights would probably not be a match for Fang Xinjian at all. As he thought of this, he threw away the dagger in his hand and calmly instructed, "Clothes." There were naturally people who helped him bathe and change his clothes. But just as he finished putting on his clothes, Huang Lin walked in impatiently. Seeing Fang Xinjian, he said, "Come with me quickly. The Imperial Capital's master has just arrived. He's going to design an Empire's divine weapon for you. Go and interact with him quickly." "Oh, right. Have you thought of what kind of weapon you want during this period of time?" Fang Xinjian's eyes lit up. He had long since had enough of the practice longsword that kept on shattering. Hearing this, he said, "I've thought about it long ago." Chapter 72. As Huang Lin walked, he said to Fang Xinjian, "It seems that the association thinks very highly of you this time around, sending one of the top 10 masters in the Royal Armory, Griffin. When you speak to him later, you must be more polite. These masters may not be very strong, but their craftsmanship in creating weapons and equipment can be said to be at the peak of perfection. If you want him to put in more effort, you must be polite." "All right." With that, he passed a silk bag of money to Fang Xinjian. "You don't have much savings now. Use this money to pay for your expenses." Fang Xinjian weighed the bag of money in his hand, estimating that there were about 200 gold coins in it. 200 gold. Based on his current allowance for nights, he would need to save up for 20 months without eating or drinking. Clearly, this was not a small sum of money to Huang Lin. Huang Lin had truly treated him as his personal disciple. However, looking at the bag of money in his hand, he could not help but feel that it was interesting. The methods of bribery in this world were really simple and crude. However, this was what Fang Xinjian liked. At the next second, he fell silent for a moment, thinking about what an ordinary person would want to say when they were touched. Huang Lin waved his hand and said, "There's no need to say anything else. Work hard for the rest of your life. If you can become a divine level expert, and let me, Huang Lin, teach a divine level expert's disciple, that would be the greatest repayment to me." "I'll work hard, master." Fang Xinjian followed Huang Lin to the study. Huang Lin waved his hand and said, "You can go. I'm not willing to meet people from the Imperial Capital. I'll wait for you in the training field. Your medicinal water has been soaked in. From today onwards, you can spar with me every day. The regional selection is different from the prefectural selection. After learning killing techniques, actual combat is an extremely important part." With that, Huang Lin left, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Fang Xinjian nodded and headed for the study. A white-haired old man was already waiting there, sitting on a chair and drinking tea slowly. Seeing that Fang Xinjian had entered, he raised his eyebrows and looked Fang Xinjian up and down, as if he was judging him. He said, "Calm disposition, powerful steps, slender hands, and sharp eyes. You're really a good swordsman." Then he waved at Fang Xinjian and said, "Come here. Let me measure your size first." Fang Xinjian walked up and handed the bag of money to the white-haired old man. The white-haired old man seemed to have a tacit understanding. He took the bag without saying a word and stuffed it into his arms as if nothing had happened. However, just as he reached out to weigh the bag, a smile immediately appeared on his face. "I'll help you measure your body first. You can tell me what kind of weapon you want." The white-haired old man smiled and said, "By the way, my name is Griffin." The old man took out a measuring tape and started to measure Fang Xinjian's fingers, arms, and even his chest, waist, height, and other measurements as he listened to Fang Xingjian's description. Fang Xingjian had long since discussed the Empire's divine weapon he wanted with Huang Lin, and he had also heard the headmaster's description of the Empire's divine weapon. He said, "I want a long sword. Firstly, it has to be sturdy, and secondly, it would be best if it has the effect of a flexible sword. It has to be able to freely change its shape and even extend its length. Of course, sharpness is also a must. I cultivate the supreme mist wind sword, so I hope to carve out wind prints and wind holes on the sword. When the air currents are sliced by the sword, they will be able to produce special sword cheese." After listing out a bunch of requirements, the white-haired old man nodded as he finished measuring Fang Xingjian's physical attributes. In the end, Fang Xingjian said, "Also, I hope to use the remains of night, first transition, or above as the main material. It would be best if the person had been in a job that controlled the atmosphere when they were alive." Griffin sized up Fang Xingjian and said, "You're someone who knows your stuff. Experts who were at the first transition and above of the night level would usually have some success in cultivating waves and communicating with ether particles when they were alive. Moreover, under the strengthening of their waves for a long period of time, their bones would usually be as tough as steel. This was especially so with the continuous strengthening from ether particles. Even after their deaths, they would still possess some special abilities. As long as the attributes of the waves were matched well, the weapons created from such remains would usually be able to increase the prowess of the user's killing technique. However, there were not many experts who would be willing to donate their remains to the Empire for the creation of weapons. Most of the Empire's experts' remains came from external wars, and each of their remains was worth 1,000 taels of gold. Ordinary weapons and armors that were forged from precious materials and possessed all sorts of strange abilities were known as the Empire's divine weapons. And those that used the remains of night were known as remains divine weapons. Those made from the remains of a first transition night were known as inferior remains divine weapons, while those made from the remains of a second transition conferred night were known as superior remains divine weapons. There were also armors forged from the remains of divine-level experts and known as divine remains equipment. They possessed unbelievably powerful abilities and were rare treasures in the world. They were also known as divine equipment. Seeing Fang Xingjian's gaze, Griffin smiled and said, "It's basically impossible for ordinary knights to obtain remains divine weapons. However," with that, he changed the topic, saying, "Fang Xingjian, you're really lucky. Your talent is outstanding, and you've already attracted the attention of an important person. He told me to take care of you and rewarded you with the spine of a conferred knight, second transition. I'll use this spine to forge a longsword for you. It's a superior remains divine weapon." Griffin patted Fang Xingjian's shoulder and said with a hint of envy, "With the care of this important person, you'll definitely have a meteoric rise. With the support of that person, it's not impossible for you to become a divine-level expert. I'll also need you to take care of me in the future." Fang Xingjian's eyes lit up slightly, and in that instant, many emotions surged in his heart. He understood that what was to come had finally come. During this period of time, putting aside the aristocrats and cursed, many clans and influences had tried to extend an olive branch to Fang Xingjian. However, they had all been stopped by Huang Lin and the headmaster. However, this time around, the olive branch from the imperial capital had been extended by one of the top 10 grandmasters in the royal armory. It was clear that it was very difficult to reject it. However, Fang Xingjian did not intend to reject it. In fact, it was just as he had said to Kyle. There was no such thing as a person who was completely free in this world. Even with his talent, before he became invincible, he would still need to find a strong backing. As the saying went, those who acquired knowledge in literature and martial arts had to belong to the royal family. He did not mind selling out his martial arts in future, but he had to sell it for a good price. Therefore, he asked, "I wonder which lord in the imperial capital is so generous." Griffin said, "Come and meet him yourself." As he spoke, he took out a piece of yellowed paper from his bosom. The edges of the paper were somewhat irregular, and there was a peculiar smell of sulfur on the paper. It was unknown how many years it had been through. What was more noteworthy was that Feng Xingjian could sense that the paper was filled with an evil aura. Griffin threw out his hand, and the paper floated in the air. He knelt down and said respectfully, "Your Highness, please come." Before he finished his words, the paper in the air combusted without any fire. However, the paper did not turn into ashes. Instead, streams of flames were emitted from the paper, jumping about in the air and forming the portrait of a man. Chapter 73. The head formed by the flames was that of a man. Seeing the astonished expression on Feng Xingjian's face, he broke into a satisfied smile. "There's no need to be astonished. This is my flame clone. My real body is currently in the imperial capital, thousands of leagues away, performing a secret technique to talk to you." "And you're Feng Xingjian? A genius who managed to transition to a windstorm sword hero in just 3 months?" The man's eyes were extremely sharp, and his squarish face looked stern, rigid, and filled with prestige. He was about 40 years old, and when he spoke, he instinctively gave off an air of being high and mighty. It was obvious that he was someone who had been in a high position for a long time. Without waiting for Feng Xingjian to reply, he continued, "I am the grandson of Deities, the son of Alexander, and the future king of Sinkota. My name is George Krieg. Are you willing to be loyal to me?" George Krieg was the current first prince of Sinkota, the first successor to the throne. Feng Xingjian's brows twitched, and he instinctively detested the other party's tone. He said, "That will depend on what price the first prince is willing to offer." The other party's tone of being high and mighty, as if everything was under his control, as if he was the center of the world, and as if he was the king of gods in the heavens, made Feng Xingjian very dissatisfied. Hearing Feng Xingjian's words, the figure in the flames frowned. "Impudent! The world is so big and is ruled by the royal family. The empire is helping you to learn, cultivate, a transition. You should be willing to die for it. As a direct descendant of the royal family, I have the ambition to unify the world through the hard work of several generations. It is only right and proper to be loyal to me. What is there for you to hesitate about?" With that, he changed his tone, saying, "You are extremely talented and outstanding. I admire you very much, which is why I ordered Master Griffin to come here and bestow upon you the remains of a conferred knight to forge a superior remains divine weapon for you. As long as you are under me, you will have all sorts of secret techniques, heavenly and earthly treasures. Even if it's the remains of Aurora Sword Spirit McDowell, the last divine level expert who had successfully transitioned into a windstorm sword hero during the first transition, it's not like I can't take it out from the royal treasury and give it to you." Griffin, who was at the side, said, "Feng Xingjian, aren't you going to thank him? His Highness, the first prince, was the destined king, the heir to the empire. Among the 5 princes, only the first prince had fought for the empire for many years, achieving great military service. In the future, the throne of the empire would definitely belong to the first prince. Being valued by the first prince and being able to display your talents is the luckiest thing that has ever happened to you. What are you still hesitating for?" Feng Xingjian had long heard about some of the empire's powers from Huanglin. The empire's king, Alexander Krieg, was obsessed with martial arts when he was young. He only got married and had children when he was 30 years old. He was now 80 years old and had a total of 5 princes. Amongst the 5 princes, the first prince was the strongest at second transition, level 29. He was only 1 step away from attaining the divine level. In particular, his mother's clan was extremely powerful and had power over the entire court. Moreover, the first prince was the successor to the #1 faction in the country, the Ancient Path of Hell. Over the years, he had fought for the empire for many years and had an extremely high reputation in the army. He had many valiant generals under him and many strategists. He had also gathered a group of experts from the Ancient Path of Hell. Regardless of whether it was in terms of his abilities or reputation, he seemed to be able to suppress the world. Feng Xingjian frowned. Although he was displeased with the other party's tone, he knew that in a feudal country like this, the first prince's actions were already considered to be courteous. Moreover, on account of the remains' divine weapon, Feng Xingjian still nodded and said, "Thank you for your appreciation, Your Highness." The first prince nodded slightly and said, "Use your finger to sign your name on it. From today onward, you'll be my trusted aide and a high-ranking official in the Empire in the future. You'll live a life of riches and glory." The flames rolled back, pushing the white piece of paper which had been floating in the air to Feng Xingjian. It was obvious that it was for him to sign it. Feng Xingjian frowned, feeling a sudden chill in his heart. He asked, "If I sign it, will there be any effects?" "Of course there will be effects." First Prince George said, "This is my job specialty, Devil's Book. His first requirement is that before you sign it, you must know the consequences of signing it. Only then will it be effective. This Devil's Book has a total of 32 pages, and each page can be used to sign one person. As long as you sign it, you'll have to be loyal to me from today onward. Once you go against my orders, you'll receive the punishment of having all your attributes reduced by half. Similarly, if I were to die of unnatural causes, your attributes will also be reduced by half." He looked at Feng Xingjian with a gaze, as if he was the king of the gods. There was both threat and temptation in his eyes. He said, "As long as you sign the Devil's Book, the Remain's divine weapon is just the beginning. I'll get someone to send you the dragon's blood potion, which is made with the royal family's secret formula. It'll be enough for you to raise all your attributes to over 100 points before the prefectural selection. You'll also be able to obtain the top-notch specialty, Dragon's Tenacity. Of course, you have outstanding talent, but you're still not strong enough. I'll send out 12 of my Hell's Ghost King's second transition jobs to serve you day and night. Haha, as long as you can pass next year's regional selection, I can even bestow a portion of McDowell's remains to you, allowing you to become the strongest conferred knight. Of course, you can also reject it." Saying this, the first prince's dense killing intent surged out, and he said almost without holding back, "However, if you reject me, I can guarantee that although the empire is big, there will definitely be no place for you to stay." Every time Griffin heard the first prince's reward, his body would shiver. He stared at Feng Xingjian, the jealousy and envy in his eyes almost burning into flames. This was especially so when the first prince promised to bring out McDowell's remains. His pupils were dilated and his breathing quickened. How many divine remains equipment were there in the entire empire that could be made from the remains of a divine-level expert? They were rare divine equipment in the world. However, when Feng Xingjian heard the first prince mention the existence of the Devil's Book, he could not help but frown. When the first prince finished speaking, Feng Xingjian had already made up his mind. Seeing Griffin slowly walking behind him and feeling the increasing temperature of the first prince's flaming head, Feng Xingjian continued to circulate the Ice Age meditation art in his consciousness, and his thoughts became increasingly clear. They've come with ill intentions. Feng Xingjian looked at the first prince and Griffin, who had surrounded him from the front and back. Sensing the killing intent that they were unleashing recklessly, Feng Xingjian's frown deepened. Feng Xingjian said calmly, "With such good conditions, of course I'll agree." After saying that, he put out his finger and slowly extended it toward the paper of the Devil's Book. The first prince nodded with a satisfied smile on his face. Griffin heaved a sigh of relief. At least this Feng Xingjian was not one of those inflexible people. As he relaxed, the muscles in his four limbs relaxed as well. However, at the next moment, Feng Xingjian exerted force with his finger, tapping on the paper like a sword. With a soft bang, the paper of the Devil's Book was pushed back. Feng Xingjian felt as if his finger had tapped onto granite. He had wanted to tear this page of the Devil's Book apart, but it seemed that this was not possible. However, although the Devil's Book was not destroyed, the first prince let out a cry of pain. "You're courting death." Flames exploded in the air, as if a bomb had been ignited. The flames that formed the first prince turned into a myriad of flame currents, bringing along a sulfuric smell as they gushed out toward Feng Xingjian. Fang Xingjian had already unleashed his stamina the moment he attacked. He retreated wildly, and at the same time, he slashed down across space with his hand. Suddenly, several tens of streams of sword cheese were created, tearing through the atmosphere. Under Fang Xingjian's skillful control, they were like many spirit snakes, jumping and turning in the air and slashing toward the flames that the first prince had turned into in Griffin's body. With a bang, the sword cheese that clashed against the first prince's flames instantly shattered. The first prince then chased after Fang Xingjian mercilessly. Sword cheese surrounded Fang Xingjian's entire body, and he dashed toward the door like a whirlwind. Griffin, who had been secretly blocking the door, struck out with his fist, and the violent force brought up a strong gale, causing the flower vases and books in the room to be blown into a mess. It also completely destroyed the sword cheese that Fang Xingjian had slashed toward him. Stop right there. He then spread out his 5 fingers and fully activated his reduced force field, wanting to completely seal off the door. However, how terrifying was Fang Xingjian's speed? Although Griffin was a grandmaster in the Royal Armory, in terms of individual prowess, he was only in the middle of the first transition. After Fang Xingjian unsheathed his long sword, he continued to slash down, and over 100 streams of sword cheese surrounded his body. They were like countless white flood dragons, bringing him along as they dashed out, creating thunderous explosions in the air. With a bang, just as Griffin's reduced force field had sealed off the door, Fang Xingjian had already smashed through the door, turning into a strong gale and dashing out. At the same time, the flames in midair also chased after him. The paper from the devil's book darted into the flames, and the entire fire started burning violently once again. Very quickly, it continued to expand, forming the first prince's entire body. The human figure formed from flames stood 4 to 5 meters in midair, looking at Fang Xingjian, who was standing several hundred meters away, surrounded by sword cheese and atmospheric dragons. Fang Xingjian also stood there without moving, staring into the first prince's eyes. His eyes were cold, and there was no hint of fear or nervousness. The first prince's body formed from flames shook the air, and he said coldly, very good. I'm even more interested in you now. But let me tell you in advance, none of the candidates I've set my eyes on have ever been able to escape." As he spoke, the flames on the body of the first prince's flame clone soared up by another 7 to 8 meters, as if a fire god had descended. Even the surrounding grass, trees, and buildings were emitting faint green smoke. A genius like you must be under my control. Otherwise, you'll be a great threat to the Empire's rule. Today, I'll let you have a taste of my methods, so that you'll be completely loyal to me. However, at that moment, 2 figures, one in front and one behind, stood in front of the first prince, surrounding him. George Krieg. Huang Lin gritted his teeth and said, "This isn't a place for you to act presumptuously. Even if you're a prince, you'll still have to wait for the Knight Association to come after you for attacking a knight conferred by the Empire." The first prince said in disdain, "The entire world's mountains and rivers, as well as millions of lives, will be under my control. So what if you're a mere knight? Putting aside Fang Xingjian, even the Knight Association will eventually be in my hands as well. But you, Huang Lin, it's been many years since we last met. Let me test you to see if your sword arts have improved." Chapter 74. George Krieg, with just a fire clone, you dare to be so presumptuous in my academy? The headmaster, who had always looked kind and amiable like an old man next door, was now furiously furrowing his brows. The muscles all over his body swelled up like balloons, and his eyes shone brightly. His aura was rising in astonishing speed. This was the first time Fang Xingjian had seen the headmaster so enraged. He had also heard that the headmaster was a level 26 second transition job, the tyrant fist of the azure skies, and that his abilities might even be above Huang Lin's. However, this was the first time he had seen the headmaster display his abilities. The reason why many people did not reach the maximum level for their second transition jobs, and were instead stuck at different levels was because after the second transition, they would need to put in a tremendous amount of effort and energy to level up. This was something that Feng Xingjian had yet to study in detail. Hearing the headmaster's words, the first prince could not help but frown. "Jackson, are you thinking of going against me as well?" "Going against me?" The headmaster's eyebrows and hair stood up as he laughed coldly. "George, you came to my academy and bullied my students. Even if you were to go before His Majesty, I'm not afraid of confronting you. As for this fire clone of yours, you can just leave it here." Before he finished his words, the headmaster punched out from afar. In an instant, the air exploded and the surface of the fire clone exploded. Large amounts of flames scattered and splattered in all directions. The first prince cried out in pain and bellowed furiously. "Jackson, who gave you the guts to attack the royal family?" "Ha ha!" The headmaster laughed maniacally. As he opened and closed his fists, they were like the main cannons of a battleship. With each punch, the atmosphere boomed and the ground cracked. Huge sparks exploded one after another on the first prince's fire clone, shattering his body continuously. If it were your real body, I would naturally not dare to attack the royal family. But since you dare to come here with just a fire clone, do you really think that you're your father or your teacher? Let me tell you, compared to your father and teacher, your breadth of mind and abilities are more than 100 times worse. If it were them, how could they not even tolerate a windstorm sword hero? Before he finished his words, the job specialty of the Tyrant Fist to the Azure Skies was fully activated. The reduced force field extended out to a distance of several hundred meters, and the force of each punch was transmitted to the first prince through the reduced force field. Following the terrifying bombardment of punches that were like cannons, the first prince's fire clone trembled incessantly and sparks flew everywhere. "Old man, how dare you?" The first prince's words were filled with endless, sinister coldness. As his flame incarnation continued to explode, he suddenly released endless sparks and black smoke. An intense, sulfuric aura surged forth, covering the sky and covering the earth. It was as if a volcano had erupted. The flames collided with the force of the headmaster's punch. With the point of collision as the center, streams of air currents would occasionally sweep out. However, the first prince managed to withstand the headmaster's attack. However, just then, streams of cold light flashed in the air. Huang Lin had unknowingly appeared behind the first prince. Sword light came out continuously, sweeping across the four limbs, waist, and abdomen of the flame clone. Killing technique. Void, cleaving longsword wherever Huang Lin's longsword swept past. All the sword forces were like pillars of light, condensing in midair and not dissipating, turning into a sword prison that encompassed the first prince. The four limbs of the flame clone had been chopped off. Originally, the sparks would have been able to reconnect, but now they were blocked by the sword forces condensed in the air, unable to reconnect. Huang Lin, Jackson, do you guys want to die so badly? The first prince's face was grim, and the flames all over his body surged. The flames continued to clash against the sword forces and fist forces, creating a series of booming sounds. However, against the combined forces of the two of them, he was gradually being suppressed. While the three experts were engaged in battle, Griffin let out a hideous laugh and dashed towards Feng Xingjian. "Oomph. Although this lad has outstanding talent and has transitioned into a windstorm sword hero, he has only transitioned for a month. I've been transitioning for a total of 20 years, even if I'm not very good at combat." As he spoke, he had already dashed up to Feng Xingjian. Opening his hands, the killing technique, Purgatory's Hand, exploded out. Griffin's killing technique, Purgatory's Hand, was formed by condensing endless firepower and tempering various types of metal essence. Not only did this allow his hands to be indestructible, unafraid of sabers and axes, they also emitted a high temperature of over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Ordinary people would basically die upon contact with them. His hands had just gotten within 15 meters of Griffin when Feng Xingjian felt waves of heat gushing towards him, as if he had arrived at the mouth of a volcano. Circulating the Ice Age meditation art continuously, Fong Xingjian continued to maintain a calm state of mind as he faced Griffin, who was dashing towards him. Veteran, first transition. Attributes, unknown. Techniques, unknown. Specialties, unknown. Killing technique, unknown. Then let's test him out first. Grinning savagely, Griffin was about to step within 10 meters of Fong Xingjian and enter the envelopment of the reduced force field. With a swing of the long sword in Fong Xingjian's hand, a whirlwind gushed out. A part of it was like a tornado made of sabers and swords heading towards Griffin, while the other part brought his body back. A series of crisp clanging sounds rang out, and the sword chi tornadoes were intercepted by Griffin with his bare hands. Slashes after slash landed on his hands, letting out a series of metallic clanging sounds. Lad, surrender obediently. The first prince is so magnanimous that he can still take you in as his disciple. If you continue to be so stubborn, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Fong Xingjian let out a cold snort. With each step he took, small pits would be left on the ground. The huge reactionary force pushed his body forward, and with the sword chi tornadoes circling around him, his movements became increasingly faster. He moved about 15 meters around Griffin, moving up and down at a speed as fast as a phantom. No matter how much Griffin tried to dodge left and right, he was unable to get within 10 meters of Fong Xingjian. The area within 10 meters was the location of the reduced force field. Before he could ascertain the limits of his opponent's strength, Fong Xingjian would definitely not take a step closer to his opponent's reduced force field. As he moved about, streams of air circled around him. His long sword slashed out continuously, and a series of white sword chis slashed out towards Griffin, who was dashing about wildly. With a crisp bang, the sword chis that Fong Xingjian had slashed out were once again shattered. Griffin said angrily, "Lad, do you only know how to dodge and dodge like this?" Fong Xingjian turned a deaf ear to Griffin's words and continued to move about at high speed, leaving behind a series of afterimages. The Ice Age meditation art circulated crazily in his mind, trying to determine every piece of information about his opponent. After consecutively shattering 16 streams of sword chis, his hands are starting to tremble a little. Every time he shatters 2 streams of sword chis, he needs to change hands to rest. He's panting. His reactions have slowed down, and so has his speed. This guy's strength is around 70 points. If he were to use his reduced force field, he wouldn't be able to completely capture my body. On the other hand, Griffin was getting more and more astonished. He saw that Fong Xingjian was surrounded by streams of sword chis, and regardless of whether it was his movement speed or the speed of his sword attacks, they were all like a raging storm. Griffin was gradually unable to see his opponent's sword attacks clearly. Another 10 streams of sword chis tore through the air, slashing out with a series of sharp whistling sounds. Griffin tried to block them in a flurry, but in the end, one of the sword chis changed direction halfway and brushed past his neck, leaving behind a trace of blood. This scared him half to death. Damn it, has this guy been training in the sword since he was in his mother's womb? Griffin let out a low bellow. Fong Xingjian, seeing that you're brimming with talent, I'll let you off today. You better think about joining the first prince's side. Don't choose the wrong path. After saying that, he let out a loud bellow, and his reduced force field was like an air bomb, instantly shattering the surrounding sword chis. He was like a cheetah, dashing out in the direction of the first prince. Fong Xingjian looked coldly at the escaping Griffin. In that short period of probing, he had already seen through his opponent's abilities. Strong on the outside, but weak on the inside, unable to withstand a single blow. As expected, as a master in creating divine weapons, he's not good at fighting. Fong Xingjian stomped hard on the ground with both feet, creating a deafening sound and sending rocks flying in all directions. At the same time, he swept out with his long sword, and countless atmospheric dragons shot out, wrapping around his body as he dashed out. Swoosh! The air was as if a banshee was shrieking, and the atmosphere was trembling crazily. Griffin turned his head and saw that a long sword had already arrived 3 inches away from his forehead, bringing with it a cold gleam. Griffin was so frightened that his pupils instantly constricted to the size of a needle. Chapter 75. How could it be so fast? How could it be so fast? There were too many astonishment, fright, nervousness, and many other reactions in his mind. However, in the process of Fang Xingjian thrusting out his sword, Griffin did not have the time to deal with these reactions. He had already instinctively unleashed his reduced force field. As a knight, first transition, expert's most basic life-saving technique, Griffin performed it at full power at the last moment. Accompanied by the violent force shooting out in all directions with Griffin as the center, there seemed to be circles of ripples appearing in the air from Griffin's body. The air was pushed out layer by layer by the reduced force field, forming explosive shock waves. Air currents gushed forth, and Fang Xingjian felt as if the surrounding air had suddenly become extremely viscous. The reduced force field enveloped him, making him feel as if he had suddenly arrived in the deep sea. However, half of Griffin's strength was clearly not enough to stop Fang Xingjian's charge. Pushed back by the reduced force field, Fang Xingjian's longsword continued to inch closer to Griffin. The time taken for the force field to erupt and the longsword to pierce out was far too short. Just as Griffin's brain received the signals from his nerves and truly felt fear, nervousness, and astonishment, the longsword was only half an inch away from his forehead. With a bang, just before the sword pierced into Griffin, the longsword was finally unable to withstand the pressure from Fang Xingjian's physical strength, the surrounding wind pressure, and Griffin's force field. It let out a crisp sound and broke into tens of pieces, shooting out in all directions. Arg! Griffin let out an agonizing cry. One of his eyeballs had been pierced through, and fresh blood spurted out from his eye socket. He was like an injured wild beast, frantically fleeing forward. The speed of Fang Xingjian's sword was too fast. It was only then that Griffin's mind reacted. His mind was filled with the terror and astonishment of having almost been killed. Fang Xingjian stood where he was, not moving, coldly looking at Griffin's frantically fleeing figure. He took a look, but did not give chase. This was because, with his long sword shattered, he had already lost the special effect of single sword world subjugation. His strength had plummeted by more than half. More importantly, a beam of fiery light shot up into the sky from his eyes. The first prince had performed some unknown secret technique, and his fire clone had directly broken through Huang Lin and the headmaster's encirclement. Carrying Griffin's body, he dashed out fiercely, disappearing from the trio's sight in an instant. Huang Lin, Jackson, this king will remember this matter. Let's meet at the association's arbitration. Huang Lin's eyes were filled with killing intent as he watched the first prince escape. At the side, Dean Jackson seemed to have returned to his benevolent grandfather appearance. He shook his head and said, "This guy's mastery of the purgatory demonic tome has become even more profound. A clone of his was actually able to escape from the two of us." Huang Lin said coldly, "That's not an ordinary clone. It's one of his 32-page Devil's Note clones. There's a total of 32 pages in the Devil's Note, and each page can condense an extraordinary clone. Not only can the clone control the person who signed on it, but it also has 10% of the first prince's powers. Is that amazing?" Fang Xingjian's eyes narrowed as he asked, "What on earth is the first prince's second transition job?" Just this specialty of being able to create clones and sign contracts is already too amazing. Jackson let out a bitter laugh and said, "That's the ancient path of hell's second transition job, the Demon Lord. If his real body were here today, or if a few more of his clones and signees were here, we'd be the ones running." Huang Lin added, "Xingjian, you've always felt that the Empire is the strongest faction in the world. Then do you know that the Empire's first emperor was the ancient path of hell's sect master? The ancient path of hell is a faction that belongs to the royal family. In every generation, the royal family will choose the two most outstanding princes. One will inherit the throne, while the other will become the ancient path of hell's sect master, passing down the legacy of the sect. The first prince is considered to be the successor to the throne. Even with the wealth of the empire's royal family, they can only produce one demon lord in every generation. As for the killing technique he cultivates, the Purgatory Demonic Tome is a secret technique of the ancient path of hell that's not passed down to outsiders. It contains the world's most ancient secrets. Fang Xingjian's eyes flickered. After hearing Huang Lin's words, it was unknown what he was secretly thinking. The headmaster consoled him, but Xingjian, don't worry. The Empire still has the Royal Knight Association to lead all the knights in the country. It's not up to George Krieg to cover the sky with one hand. Moreover, Lin and I aren't nameless people either. If he doesn't succeed this time around, he won't have the face to look for trouble with you personally before the regional selection. As for the small tricks, we'll hold them up for you. As expected, the headmaster and teacher also have big characters backing them up, but at the level of a confer knight, how can he possibly be alone? Fang Xingjian sighed inwardly, then nodded and said, "Then I'll go practice first. I haven't finished today's homework." Go ahead." Huang Lin looked at Fang Xingjian with a gratified expression and said, "I saw your battle with Griffin earlier. Although he's not good at fighting, he's been at the first transition for many years. For you to be able to defeat him shows that you've improved tremendously over the past month. You don't have to worry about the weapon. The headmaster and I will think of something. You can go ahead first." Fang Xingjian nodded and left. He looked at the broken sword in his hand and understood that his abilities were limited by the weapon. In fact, if not for the fact that the long sword could not withstand his strength and speed, he would have been able to stab Griffin to death earlier. Looking at Fang Xingjian's departing silhouette, Huang Lin said coldly, "They're too quick. No matter how fast Xingjian's growth is, it's impossible for him and us to fend them off. If we come a little later and Xingjian had been forced to sign his name on the Devil's Note," the headmaster nodded and sighed, "then it's time to contact that person. It's just that ever since he returned from his study trip, his whereabouts have been uncertain. He probably won't be able to arrive within a short period of time." "It's not just contacting him," Huang Lin said. "To think that the armory is also in the hands of the first prince. We'll have to think of another way to get Xingjian's weapon." On the other side, the first prince's flame clone was carrying Griffin as he fled frantically. Within a few minutes, he had already dashed out a distance of over 10 kilometers. The two of them landed on the ground with a loud bang. Griffin covered his eyes and said in exasperation, that lad, I'm going to kill him." "Shut up," the first prince said coldly. Looking at Griffin, who had fallen to the ground, he felt a little impatient. Griffin was indeed an expert in forging weapons and divine weapons, but when it came to matters related to battle, he was a complete burden. The first prince's flame clone continued to shrink, and in the blink of an eye, it had already turned into the appearance of a 1-meter-tall child. He thought to himself, Huang Lin and Jackson, to think that they've caused this clone of mine to suffer a great deal of damage? But that Fang Xingjian's potential is really not to be underestimated. He's only transitioned into a windstorm sword hero for a month, and he's already able to defeat Griffin? If that's the case, then all the more I can't allow him to land in the hands of others. The armory, the path of hell, the imperial capital, and the northern army are all in urgent need of manpower. But if this Fang Xingjian is allowed to continue to grow, he'll also become a great threat. I can't just leave him be. A genius like this can only be in my hands. The first prince's flame eyes narrowed slightly, like two spots of dim light floating in the air. Just then, a figure dashed out from the forest. It was Kaunitz, who had been hiding from the people in the academy and had come to the vicinity to practice his sword arts. The injury on his skull had just healed, but he was too ashamed to return to the academy. Therefore, he had been training alone in the vicinity. Earlier, he had seen sparks descending from the sky and had thus chased after them to see what was going on. Seeing Kaunitz's sudden appearance, the flames that the first prince had transformed in had jumped slightly, and he suddenly laughed. He had recognized Fang Xingjian. It was because Fang Xingjian was one of the countless candidates he had signed a contract with the Devil's Note. "Treja's lad, as long as you give up your freedom and sign a contract with me, I'll be able to bestow you with endless power and trample on Fang Xingjian. Chapter 76. Although the battle between the first prince, the headmaster, and Huang Lin had been intense, the entire process had happened too quickly. Almost no one in the academy had noticed it. When the headmaster returned to his office, he discovered that the librarian, Manny, who had helped Fang Xingjian before, was already standing there. The headmaster asked, "Why did you think of coming to my place?" "Old man, I've been watching Fang Xingjian's matter from the beginning to the end." Manny no longer had his usual glib manner. His tone was serious, his expression solemn, and his eyes filled with the vicissitudes of life. From a commoner, he relied on his talent and hard work to walk down the path. I've watched him cultivate for over 20 hours every day. I've watched him endure the supercilious looks and mockery of others. I've watched him become a windstorm sword hero. I've watched him beat up Griffin so badly that he scurried away like a rat. I feel that I can't continue to be so dispirited. Headmaster Jackson's gaze grew agitated as he looked at his son and said, "Manny, to think that ever since you failed the regional selection over 10 years ago, you've been dispirited. To think that you'd be spurred on by Fang Xingjian and rise up once again." Manny's expression was calm as he said, "It's still too early to talk about rising up. My talent can only be considered ordinary when compared to those real monsters. But seeing how hard the kids are working, I don't wish to continue staying low. Old man, I'll need to spend some time to recover. You can hand over the library's work to someone else." All right. Headmaster Jackson broke into a satisfied smile. "As long as you don't continue to be dispirited, you can do whatever you want." At this moment, the extremely strong expert who had been clashing head-on with the first prince earlier seemed to have instantly turned into an old neighbor who doted on his son. That night, Fang Xingjian sat cross-legged in the quiet room in the villa. As he circulated the waves throughout his body, he also circulated the Ice Age meditation art at full force in his mind, continuously increasing the familiarity of his mental cultivation method. His mind was calm and cold as he continued to think about everything that had happened today. After a full 2 hours, he finally opened his eyes and let out a long sigh. The advancement of my mental cultivation method is still too slow. When there's injustice in the heart, it's hard to calm down. Fang Xingjian knew that the reason why his mental cultivation method was progressing well was because of that old lady from the Treja clan, Rebecca, and the first prince. These two fellows had given him trouble, causing the distracting thoughts in his mind to surge, but he was unable to get rid of them completely. Then he began to think about his future path of cultivation. Right now, there were only 4 years and 2 months left to the 5-year period and 8 months left to the next regional selection. As for the weapons, Huang Lin and the others had already gone to think of a solution. It was not his turn to care. Right now, other than mental cultivation methods and killing techniques, Fang Xingjian was self-cultivating for 24 hours a day. His Supreme Mistwind Sword was already at level 18, and he believed that it would be able to reach level 20 in a few days' time. Even if the maximum level was not just at level 20, he would be able to reach it within a month. Then, it would be time for him to come up with a new cultivation plan. Teacher told me not to level up for now. This is the right strategy. With each level of the Wind Shadow Sword Divinity, I'll be able to increase my agility attribute by 11 points. From level 10 to level 19, I'll be able to increase my agility attribute by 99 points, raising my speed to a terrifying level. But if that's the case, when I raise my agility attribute once again, when it exceeds 180 plus, I'll need to expend over 180,000 potential points for each increment. It won't be like now, where each increment only requires 70,000 potential points for each increment. However, it was clear that Fang Xingjian would not be able to drag it on and not level up. Although Huang Lin had asked him to hold it in for a year or two, he knew his own situation well. He only had 4 years and 2 months' time, and from level 10 to level 19, ordinary knights would take an average of 1 year. Fang Xingjian had given himself half a year's time to reach level 19. So, If he wanted to reach level 19 before the regional selection next year, he would have to start working hard to level up in 2 months' time. I only have 2 months left to use a small amount of potential points to increase my attributes. I'll focus on leveling up in 2 months' time and reach level 19 of the first transition before the regional selection. Then, I'll have to think of a way to increase the amount of potential points I receive every day. Although the amount of potential points I receive every day is more than 10 times that of ordinary people, it's still too little for 2 months' time. But I've learned almost all of the nurturing techniques that the Academy has. If I want new nurturing techniques that don't repeat each other to increase my potential points, I'll have to learn sword techniques from somewhere else. Just as Fang Xingjian was deep in thought, his ears trembled slightly. He had already heard the slight vibrating sound in the air. The Supreme Mistwind Sword was a sword technique that used sword techniques to control air currents. Therefore, Fang Xingjian's grasp of air currents was exceptionally accurate. He exerted a little force with his feet and floated up gently, as if he had lost his weight. Then, with a flash, he disappeared from the secret chamber. Outside the villa, Jack and Anthony knocked on the door. Looking at the maid who had popped her head out, Jack said anxiously, "We're looking for Fang Xingjian. It's urgent." "But the Lord is currently cultivating in the meditation room." The maid said timidly, "Lord Huang Lin has instructed that when the Lord is cultivating, no one is to disturb him. But our matter is very urgent. Do you know that tomorrow is the deadline for the registration for the inter-class battle? Kaunitz hasn't been to school for a month, and I heard that he's about to be expelled. There are only 8 of us participating in the tournament. We were already at the bottom in last month's tournament, and this time around, we're still going to be eliminated in the first round. Do you know how terrible the punishment is for the bottom 3? Not only will our subsidies be deducted, our cultivation resources will also be reduced. Moreover, these rankings will have to be reported to the Empire. Once it was reported to the Empire, it would naturally enter the Knight Association's files. It would have a great impact on every knight's future. Moreover, the reduction of resources could still be taken from their families for the other aristocrats. But for Jack and Anthony, it was a huge blow. On the contrary, if they were able to achieve good results in the inter-class battle, not only would they be able to get more resources, they would also be able to gain the attention of various important people in school. Of course, due to the difference in time between the transitions, it was usually very difficult for the lower year classes to win against the upper year classes. What they pursued was to win against the classes that were around the same level as them, or to have a stunning performance against the upper year classes. And now, as Class 256, which Fang Xingjian was in, had lost Fang Xingjian and Kaunitz, there were only a few of them, and they were young. Naturally, their performance was unsightly. "All right." Seeing the timid maid, Anthony patted Jack and said in a gentle voice, "It's not that we have to meet Xingjian. It's just that after he's done with his cultivation, can we trouble you to tell him that we've come to look for him?" "All right, I'll let the Lord know." The maid nodded and said seriously. Just then, the 3 of them felt a whirlwind sweeping past at the same time. As the white sword cheese dissipated in the air, Fang Xingjian's silhouette floated down from midair, gradually appearing before the 3 of them. Fang Xingjian said calmly, "Inter-class battle?" "That's right, Xingjian." Seeing that Fang Xingjian had appeared, Jack immediately became agitated. The first inter-class battle was held 1 month after we transitioned. We've all just started learning killing techniques, and those senior students from a most recent batch have been learning for 1 more year than us. There's no way we can win against them, and we were eliminated in the first round. You transitioned into a windstorm sword hero. This time around, you must participate in the inter-class battle with us, and teach those B***** a good lesson. Anthony said, "Xingjian, if you're very busy, it's fine if you don't come. I heard from Lord Huang Lin that you're at a critical juncture in your cultivation." Inter-class battle? Sparring with other students? Fang Xingjian stroked his chin and thought to himself, every student here comes from different places, and they've learned nurturing sword techniques for various factions and academies. If I can learn more nurturing sword techniques through sparring with them, I'll be able to increase the amount of potential I gain every day. However, they usually use killing techniques in their battles. I'll have to think of something else. Thinking of this, Fang Xingzhan's eyes narrowed slightly. Looking at the two people before him who were filled with anticipation, he said, "It's true that teacher told me to focus on my cultivation and not bother about the other matters in the academy. However, now that my killing techniques have improved, I do need to test my sword techniques through actual combat. I'll be participating in the inter-class battle this time around." "That's great." Jack laughed out loud. "I was bullied so badly by those old fellows previously. Xingzhan, this time around, you must help us teach them a good lesson." "Ha ha ha. You're now the trump card of our class." Anthony reminded him. "It's not that simple. Those students have all trained here for 1 to 2 years, 5 to 6 years, or even 7 to 8 years. Amongst them, there are even prefectural champions like Xingzhan. Many of them have already transitioned to level 19, and some have even participated in the regional selection before. Their abilities are not to be underestimated." Chapter 77. Hearing Anthony's reminder, Fang Xingzhan nodded and said, "I understand. Count me in for the inter-class competition this time around." He had just finished speaking when a strong gust of wind blew past, and Fang Xingzhan's silhouette became increasingly faint, gradually disappearing from everyone's sight. Jack gulped and said, "Xingzhan's speed is getting more and more elusive." Anthony laughed. "Isn't that even better? Although Kaunitz isn't here this time around, with Xingzhan around, we should be able to hold on for a few more rounds, right?" Although the two of them already knew that Fang Xingzhan was very strong, that his occupation as a windstorm sword hero was very strong, and that his talent was even stronger, they had never thought that Fang Xingzhan would be able to defeat those knights at the peak of their abilities who had been training in the academy for 5 to 6 years, or even 7 to 8 years. On the other hand, Fang Xingzhan had already returned to the training room to start cultivating his supreme mist wind sword technique. Since there were only a few more days before the inter-class competition, he had to make good use of his time to cultivate his killing techniques, striving to bring his supreme mist wind sword technique to level 20 before the competition. He wondered what additional special effects it would bring. The next day, the news of Fang Xingzhan registering for the inter-class competition spread throughout the entire Night Academy. Countless people were secretly anticipating what kind of power Fang Xingzhan, who had transitioned into a windstorm sword hero, would be able to display. In Class 252's classroom, there were 10 people in this class who had been training for 4 more years than Fang Xingzhan and the others. A tall, fair-skinned, golden-haired man laughed, to think that Fang Xingzhan would be participating in the competition as well. He has always been treated like a treasure by the headmaster, and even applied for extra leave for him. Even the Knight Association has agreed to it. I had thought that he would be training in seclusion for the next year. He was the current prefectural champion of Class 252, Renaud from Cursed Aristocrat Academy. Renaud was half reclining on a chair, with a few aristocrat knights sitting in front of and behind him. As for the commoner knights, they were busy serving tea. As Renaud spoke, he glanced at the feminine-looking man next to him. It was the man who had greeted Kaunitz on the day of the prefectural selection. He was also a knight from Tresia Academy. Renaud looked at the feminine-looking man and said, "Xiao-yi, this Fang Xingzhan could be considered a great foe of Tresia. Before he grows up, why don't you teach him a good lesson? I heard that Kaunitz is hiding at home now and doesn't even dare to come out. If he doesn't report to the academy like this, he'll be expelled soon, right? You don't have to worry about Kaunitz. He has received the recognition of an important person and has been specially approved by the imperial capital to not participate in the academy's daily cultivation. Instead, he is undergoing special training." The effeminate man, Xiao-yi, said, "As for Fang Xingzhan, he has only transitioned a month ago. Defeating him is a matter of course, not a lesson. Moreover, whether we can meet them or not depends on the situation of the groups." Currently, there were a total of 9 classes in the Night Academy. The inter-class tournament would be split into 3 groups by drawing lots in the first round. Each group would compete in 2 rounds of a round-robin tournament. A win would be worth 3 points, a draw would be worth 1 point, and a loss would be worth 0 points. The last person in each group would be eliminated. If the scores were the same, the time elapsed, and the number of people eliminated in the competition would be determined. There would be a total of 6 teams left. The first and second place teams would enter the semi-finals directly. The other 4 teams would go through an elimination round. The 2 victorious teams would then compete with the teams with the first and second place points to fight for the right to compete in the finals. Hearing Xiao Yi's explanation, although Renaud was extremely curious as to which important person Kaunitz had received the recognition of, and why the imperial capital had given the order to interfere with the academy, he knew that Xiao Yi would definitely not reveal it. Therefore, he smiled and said, Class 256 is too weak. All of them are newbies who have transitioned a month or 2 ago. However, Fang Xingjian is a windstorm sword hero. Although he has only transitioned a month ago and is still very weak, with a bit of luck, he might be able to advance to the next round. Just as Renaud was casually analyzing the situation, a middle-aged man with black hair and eyes ran over. His face looked weathered and his skin was tanned. Although he was wearing a night attire, when he saw Renaud and the others, he kept lowering his head and bowing, appearing out of place. This was a commoner knight who had come from the lowest rung of society. The moment he ran in, he bowed to Renaud and the other aristocrats, saying, Young Master Renaud, the results of the drawing of lots are out. Our Class 252 has drawn the same group as Class 256 and Class 253. Class 256? Renaud's eyes lit up. Isn't that Fang Xingjian's class? This batch of commoners are all very arrogant. This time around, I'll be able to teach them a good lesson. Saying that, he looked at Xiao Yi and said, Xiao Yi, you can also help your Treasure Academy's people take revenge. Although you can't kill him, breaking a few of his bones shouldn't be a big deal. Xiao Yi said calmly, Aren't you afraid of offending this future divine level expert? It's not that easy to reach the divine level. If we're constantly worrying about this person becoming a divine level and that person becoming a divine level, then we can forget about fighting. Renaud smiled in disdain. Moreover, he came to participate in the competition after training for a month. If we don't teach him a good lesson, are we supposed to tie our hands up and let him win? Against the current him, it's normal for us to win. It's something we should do. What's there to offend? Xiao Yi said in disdain, You're still afraid. Looking at the other students around him who were also wearing unnatural expressions, Xiao Yi's expression turned even more gloomy. He said coldly, I know that none of you want to offend a windstorm sword hero. Since that's the case, leave him to me during the competition. On the other side, in the Class 256 that Fang Xingjian was in, everyone was sighing. How could it be like this? Jack held his head and shouted, Class 252, Renaud and Xiao Yi's class, has been training in the academy for a total of 4 years. It's too difficult to win against them. Why can't we be matched against Class 255 and Class 254, which have been training for 1 or 2 years longer than us? Anthony analyzed from the side. It's very difficult for us to win against Class 252. Now, whether or not we can advance depends on whether or not we can defeat those fellows from Class 253. How we fight? With what? Barbara, who was in the other corner of the classroom, looked at the two of them in disdain and said, Class 253 came 3 years earlier than us, which means that they've completed the first transition 3 years earlier than us. They've cultivated waves 3 years earlier than us, and their killing techniques 3 years earlier than us. We're missing Kaunitz, and the two of you are burdens. I think we can only wait until next year to bully the new batch of students. Her tone was filled with disdain, obviously looking down on commoner knights. Jack retorted, unconvinced, but this time, Xingjian is participating. He's a windstorm sword hero and has unparalleled speed. With him around, we have hope of winning. So what if he's a windstorm sword hero? Barbara retorted, he's only transitioned a month ago. 1 month, do you understand? He's only been training killing techniques for a month. How strong can he become in a month's time? Even if his talent is unparalleled and he can win against 1 or 2 of them, there are 10 of them. We're still 1 short. And with the 2 of you burdens, even if he's made of steel, How many of them can he fend off? Jack's face flushed red, although he wanted to rebut, thinking that it was because he was weak that he was a burden to the class. He was unable to say a word. However, he immediately reacted, pointing at Barbara and saying, "Then can you do it? Can you win against those knights from class 253? Barbara let out a cold laugh and said, "I still have a chance of winning against the two weakest commoners in their class." As she spoke, she threw a glance at Jack and Anthony, her meaning clear. She continued to tease. "Also, not only will we not be able to win against class 252, the person in second place in that batch is counted as a senior from Treasure Academy. You guys better tell Fong Xinjiang to be careful." "All right, stop quarreling. That's enough, let's go." Just as the two of them were arguing more and more intensely, Anthony pulled Jack back, while Ferdinand pulled Barbara back. However, before they left, Barbara still looked at Jack unhappily and said, "Tell Fong Xinjiang that although he is very strong, the interclass competition is not a one-man competition. Tell him to listen to the commands and not to act recklessly." "All right, Barbara, that's enough." Ferdinand said, "I'm sorry, but I'll have to trouble you guys to tell Fong Xinjiang that on the day of the competition, we'll still need to coordinate well in order to win. It's really not good for someone like him to not participate in class activities." Seeing the few aristocrats leaving, Jack said indignantly, "These aristocrats, aren't they just relying on their numbers?" There were a total of 5 aristocrats in class 256. Even though Countess was not around, there were still 4 experts from the aristocratic faction. Usually, they had the greatest say in the class. Anthony patted him on the shoulder and said, "All right, this is how the world works. Haven't you gotten used to it?" Just as the two of them were conversing, Robert, Tyrant Fist Dojo's dojo master who had completed his first transition before the prefectural selection, walked over, cupped his hands towards the two of them, and said, "The two of you, please tell Fong Xinjiang that I, Robert, am willing to listen to his commands during the interclass competition." After saying that, he left without waiting for the two of them to reply. Jack and Anthony looked at each other. A few seconds later, Anthony said thoughtfully, "To think that Robert actually gave in." Jack revealed an envious gaze. This is the charm of a windstorm sword hero. Chapter 78. A few days later, it was the first day of the interclass competition. Fong Xinjiang came to a halt in the training room. Looking at the level 20 Supreme Mistwind sword on his stats window, he let out a breath. It's finally done. What made Fong Xinjiang satisfied was that level 20 Supreme Mistwind sword was still not at the maximum level. Other than the 3-foot sword light, it also had an additional level 20 special ability. Level 20 Supreme Mistwind sword allowed the user's understanding of sword arts and air currents to reach the pinnacle. Not only could they create all sorts of sword cheese out of thin air, they could also control cheese with swords and swords with cheese. The Academy's interclass competition was held in a canyon over 10 kilometers to the east. The entire canyon ran from north to south and was about 2 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. The cliffs were about 100 meters tall, and the canyon was overgrown with plants and countless small, ferocious beasts. And now, countless people had already chosen the best spots on the cliffs, looking at the battlefield in the canyon. The interclass competition lasted for 4 days. The first 2 days were the group stage, with each class having 1 match each day. The third and fourth days were the elimination rounds. The top 2 teams in each class would enter the semifinals, while the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth teams would go through 2 matches. The top 2 teams with the highest scores in the group stage would enter the semifinals. The 5th day was the finals. The way each match was conducted was that the 2 teams would enter the arena at the southernmost and northernmost ends of the canyon respectively. At the place where they entered, there would be a small-scale fortress. As long as the team managed to take over the opponent's small-scale fortress, it would be considered as the winner. And if both teams were unable to take over the opponent's fortress after 2 hours, it would be considered a draw. The only condition for taking over the fortress was that there was no resistance from the opponent in the entire fortress. Such a competition was obviously very confrontational. However, as they were knights conferred by the country, the use of lethal attacks was prohibited throughout the entire competition. The main focus was on sparring. Even so, there would still be knights who would be severely injured in the competition every year, and there would even be knights who would die in it every few years. After all, swords had no eyes. Moreover, if one wanted to have a practical effect, they would have to take on a certain amount of risk. If knights who cultivated killing techniques wanted to improve, they would have to go through practical battles as well. And the first match today was between Fang Xinjian's Class 256 and Class 253, which was 3 years ahead of them. Because it was more difficult to defeat Renault, Xiao Yi, and the others in Class 252, most people felt that whether or not they could defeat Class 253 was the key to whether or not they could advance from the group stage. Jack, Anthony, Barbara, Ferdinand, and the others had already entered. They stood in front of the southern fortress, anxiously looking in the direction of the cave entrance. Barbara frowned and said, "Countess clearly said that he wouldn't be coming, but what's with Fang Xinjian? It will start in 3 minutes. Why isn't he here yet?" "Don't worry, he will definitely come," Anthony said confidently, but he was also staring at the entrance of the cave. Just as everyone was anxiously waiting, the sound of metal colliding suddenly came from the direction of the cave entrance. It sounded like countless pieces of metal colliding together, and the sound came from afar. "What's that sound? Is Fang Xinjian here?" Under everyone's gaze, Fang Xinjian walked out slowly from the cave, carrying a huge wicker basket on his back. There were at least 30 or more metal longswords in the basket. They swayed and clashed with Fang Xinjian's footsteps, releasing a series of crisp sounds. Barbara frowned and asked, "What is this guy doing?" Ferdinand also looked at Fang Xinjian, puzzled. Zhou Yong and Carter both felt uneasy when they saw Fang Xinjian. Without Countess as their backing, they were really afraid that Fang Xinjian would take it out on them. After all, they had maliciously slandered Fang Xinjian many times. Jack ran up and looked at the huge pile of swords in Fang Xinjian's basket. He asked curiously, "Why did you bring so many swords? One sword isn't enough." Fang Xinjian threw a glance at everyone, and Barbara and the others felt their hair stand on end. They immediately felt as if the blades of swords had brushed past their necks. This guy. Ferdinand was filled with both shock and fear. Looking at the expressionless Fang Xinjian, he sighed inwardly. This guy's sword arts are getting more and more terrifying. He gave it some thought, then walked up, cupped his hands, and said, "Fang Xinjian, there was some conflict between us in the past, but they were just some misunderstandings. I hope that we can clear up the misunderstandings in the future and work hard together to win the regional selection." As he said that, he took out a square box the size of a palm from his pocket and handed it to Fang Xinjian. Fang Xinjian took the box and opened it. There were a few gold bars inside. He estimated that there were about 50 gold bars. Nodding his head, Fang Xinjian kept the box and said, "All right, I've got what you want." Barbara, who was behind Ferdinand, said angrily, "Ferdinand, what are you doing?" Ferdinand said impatiently, "We didn't have any major conflicts with Fang Xinjian to begin with. In the past, it was only on account of his friendship with Countess. Now that Countess has left, I don't understand why you're still holding on." Barbara was so angry that she stomped her feet. Robert and Boris, the two successors of the martial arts faction, also walked over to Fang Xinjian's side. Robert took the lead and said, "Xinjian, tell us what to do in the upcoming competition. We'll all listen to you." Robert looked at Fang Xinjian and revealed a friendly smile, no longer as arrogant and despotic as before. Carter and Zhou Yong wanted to come over and apologize, but they could not put down their pride. They were not as flexible as Robert, causing the two of them to be caught between a rock and a hard place. Seeing this, the fury on Barbara's face deepened. "What are you guys doing? Just because he transitioned into a windstorm sword hero, you guys are willing to be his lackeys?" Ferdinand's expression darkened. Barbara was scolding him as well. He said coldly, "Barbara, can't you think before you speak? You just open your mouth and bite people." Seeing that Robert, Ferdinand, Boris, Zhou Yong and Carter were all staring at her. Barbara's anger weakened. However, the fury on her face remained. She took in a deep breath and said, Fang Xinjian, don't think that I'll listen to you just because you've transitioned into a windstorm sword hero. Barbara, am not like some people forgetting what's right for the sake of benefits and submitting to power. Don't expect me to listen to you in this competition. However, Fang Xinjian did not say a word. He could not be bothered with Barbara, who was full of herself. He only walked to a position 100 meters away from the fortress and stabbed the long swords in the basket into the ground. The few of you listen up. In the competition later, as he spoke, he moved quickly, stabbing the long swords into the ground at lightning speed. Each long sword was a distance of 1 to 2 meters apart, and in the blink of an eye, they had formed a circle blocking the front of the fortress. I alone am enough. Fang Xinjian pointed to the circle of swords formed by the long swords and said, All of you hide behind this line. I'll beat up whoever comes out. Fang Xinjian, Barbara was the first to shout, Are you crazy? The expressions of the others also turned grim. By doing this, Fang Xinjian was looking down on them. Ferdinand's countenance was also dark as he said, Fang Xinjian, we know that you're very powerful, but what you're doing is too humiliating. It's fine if you don't want to listen. Fang Xinjian shook his head, waved his hand at the others, and said with a smile, Then I'll wipe you all out first before heading to the competition. The reason why Fang Xinjian had done this was because this way he would be able to control the rhythm of the competition, fully spar with each and every one of his opponents, and secretly learn sword techniques as he willed. After saying this, the mental cultivation method in his mind circulated even more smoothly, as if he had broken through another obstacle. At the same time, his eyes lit up as if streams of sword light were flashing in them. Especially when he stared at Zhou Yong, the only person in class 256 who was practicing sword techniques. His gaze was as if he was looking at food. He still remembered Treja Academy's nurturing techniques, and there were still a few that he had yet to learn from Countess. Chapter 79. On a cliff that was over 100 meters high, Headmaster Jackson and Huang Lin stood together. Cursed city lord, financial officer, tax officer, and other influential figures in Cursed were watching the competition together. They had all been invited to watch the Knight Academy's interclass competition this month. Cursed City Lord was an astute and capable middle-aged man. He smiled and said to Headmaster Jackson, Congratulations, old Headmaster. You've taken in a good student. This is only the 4th Windstorm Sword hero since the founding of the Empire. This goes to show that old Headmaster has been teaching Cursed a lot. I heard that His Majesty had also praised you greatly in the Imperial capital. Jackson grinned and said, It's all because His Majesty is good at governing the country. I'm just basking in his glory. The city lord pointed to the south, to the fortress and the 7 people in front of it, and said, Is Fang Xinjian there? Hearing that, everyone looked over, as if wanting to see if the legendary Windstorm Sword hero really had 3 heads and 6 arms, with a green face and sharp fangs. In fact, as important figures in the city, it was impossible for them to watch every round of the interclass competition. The reason why they had rushed over today was because they wanted to see how powerful the legendary Windstorm Sword hero was. Hearing that, the headmaster swept his gaze across the fortress in the south and said, Fang Xinjian hasn't appeared yet. The city lord reminded him, I heard that this Fang Xinjian has just completed his job transition a month ago. Although the Windstorm Sword hero's speed is unparalleled, is it really all right for him to participate in the competition just like that? What if the sword has no eyes? After all, so many resources have been invested. The Windstorm Sword hero was the legendary first transition job. To be able to produce such a knight in his district was also a political achievement for the city lord. He was saying this because he was worried that the people in the academy would spoil things through excessive enthusiasm. If Fang Xinjian were to be injured, that would not be good. And when he mentioned the word resources, he seemed to be gnashing his teeth. It was obvious that he still remembered that the headmaster had taken the winged eagle he had reared and fed it to Fang Xingjian to nourish him. The headmaster waved his hands and said with a little complacency, This lad is very dumb in other aspects, but in sword arts, he's a true genius. I'm afraid that even ordinary knights might not be his match." "Oh," the city lord's eyes lit up. "Headmaster, you're so confident? Why don't we have a bet?" Hearing the words gamble, the clerk smiled bitterly. He knew very well how much his city lord loved to gamble. He wanted to remind the city lord, but Huang Lin's eyes lit up. Huang Lin rushed to say, "Then let's make a bet. I bet that Fang Xingjian and the others will win this round." Both he and the dean had personally seen Fang Xingjian easily defeat Master Griffin from the armory. Although Griffin was good at forging weapons, and his battle prowess could only be considered to be in the middle of the first transition, it still spoke volumes about Fang Xingjian's abilities. Moreover, Huang Lin had fought with Fang Xingjian many times, so he had a better understanding of his strength. Therefore, Huang Lin was very confident that Fang Xingjian's class would be able to win this match. As long as their class did not make any major mistakes and the others defended the fort, Fang Xingjian would be able to use the Windstorm Sword hero's high-speed guerrilla attacks to defeat his opponents one by one. Then, victory would be a piece of cake. Hearing Huang Lin's words, everyone present was taken aback, especially Cursed City Lord. His face revealed an expression of interest. In Fang Xingjian's batch, most of them have only transitioned for 1 or 2 months. Other than Robert, they are all newbies at the knight level, and there's still one person missing. If they can still win against 10 experienced knights, wouldn't it be a little exaggerated? The city lord gave it some thought and said, "Since that's the case, I bet that Fang Xingjian and the others will lose." Huang Lin said, "All right, if I win, can I ask the city lord to part with the knight's remains that we bought last year?" The city lord was stunned for a moment, secretly hating this old man. It's not enough for him to take my winged eagle, and now he's eyeing my remains? This set of remains was a precious treasure that the city lord had bought from overseas with great difficulty. It was the arm bone of a conferred knight, second transition. He had planned to find an opportunity to get the masters in the armory to make it for him, so that it could be passed down to his son and grandson. The headmaster looked at this scene with a smile, making it impossible for others to tell what he was thinking. This also made Cursed City Lord hesitate. Huang Lin said, "City Lord, are you not willing to part with it? Then I'll add some more chips. I bet that Fang Xingjian and the others will be able to defeat their opponents within half an hour. If I lose, then this long sword in my hand will be yours." With that, he drew out the black iron longsword at his waist. Waves of ether particles kept on emitting from the longsword. As Huang Lin's personal weapon, this longsword was also an Empire's divine weapon forged by the royal family's armory. Although it was not forged from the remains, the material it was made from was also worth a lot of gold. It was mixed with mithril, adamantine, and other rare materials, and could communicate with ether particles to form a force field that could increase the user's speed and agility by about 10%. This was clearly a top-notch Empire's divine weapon. 10% of the difference in strength and agility could often change the direction of a battle. Hearing Huang Lin's words, a hint of interest flashed in Cursed City Lord's eyes. He stroked his chin and suddenly smiled. "All right, I'll bet with you. But the bet between the two of us is a little too little. Is there anyone else who wants to participate?" In an ordinary interclass competition, each round would take up to 45 minutes or more. To end it within 30 minutes, it would require a complete one-sided victory. Although Cursed City Lord had guessed that a Windstorm Sword hero would be very powerful, he did not believe that a Windstorm Sword hero who had only transitioned for a month would be able to defeat someone who had transitioned for 3 years. Hearing that, Huang Lin let out a long sigh. "Xingjian, it's up to you whether or not you can get this big gift." Just then, another person stood up and said, "How about I join as well?" That person's white hair was combed neatly, and he was dressed in a well-ironed tailcoat. It was Treja clan's clan head, Countess's father. Nodding at the city lord and Huang Lin, he smiled and said, Fang Xingjian is indeed cursed pride, but he is still too young. It has only been a month since he transitioned. Although the Windstorm Sword hero is very powerful, he is still too young. I'll bet that he will only be able to win after 40 minutes. Let's use our Treja clan's body tempering ointment for a year. Huang Lin's brows twitched. He knew that the Treja clan's body tempering ointment was good stuff. It contained the essence of many medicinal herbs and ferocious beasts, and was a secret of the Treja clan. Countess's attributes, which were higher than ordinary people's at the age of 16, and Rebecca's ability to grind out over 100 tribute points at level 19 of the first transition, were all closely related to this body tempering ointment. Treja clan's clan head could see Huang Lin's confidence, and obviously wanted to grant his wish. He did not wish to make enemies with Fang Xingjian, Huang Lin, and the others, and was here to ask for peace. Just then, another person walked out. It was a middle-aged lady with a crescent moon tattoo on her face, dressed in revealing clothes. She threw a glance at Huang Lin and said, "Old Huang, aren't you looking down on us from the Netherworld Valley too much?" The prefectural champion of Class 253, who was about to fight against Fang Xingjian, was a disciple of the Netherworld Valley. Huang Lin said in disdain, when Claude was in the Netherworld Valley, he was not valued at all. His forte has never been poison arts. Tina shouted, "That's the foundation that our Netherworld Valley has built for him. Do you know how much we've invested in him to give him a physique like that of a ferocious beast?" Seeing this lady from the Netherworld Valley, everyone present subconsciously took a step back. It was because the people of the Netherworld Valley specialized in barehanded and poison arts. No one knew when they would be able to poison the air, water, or weapons. They were the most frightening and the most reassuring. This lady by the name of Tina was an elder of the Netherworld Valley and was famous for being a troublemaker. She shouted, "I don't care about Windstorm Sword hero or not. I'm betting that Fang Xingjian's team will lose an hour later. I'll bet 100 sets of our Netherworld Valley's antidotes. Our antidotes can cure 90% of all poisons in this world." A pale-faced old man with a cold expression said, "Tina, you're so confident, but you're still betting an hour?" She grinned. "I know he can run fast, so I'll bet 40 minutes for him to lose and the remaining 20 minutes for him to run." Mph. The pale-faced old man was the founder of Cursed Aristocrat Academy, as well as Ferdinand's teacher in the academy. He was a veteran representative of Cursed Aristocrats, Houston. He said, "My favorite disciple, Ferdinand, is also in Fang Xingjian's team. Of course, I hope that they'll win. But they're still young. Even with the Windstorm Sword hero, it'll still be a little difficult for them to win. I'll bet on a draw. I'll bet on my manor in the north of the city." "Draw?" Tina reacted in an instant, letting out a strange cry and saying, "You sly old man. The Windstorm Sword hero can run fast, and as long as Fang Xingjian focuses on harassing him, he'll definitely have a chance to draw." Houston smiled, looked at Cursed City Lord and asked, "I wonder how the City Lord would like to bet." At that moment, in the south, Fang Xingjian came out. "Oh, is that Fang Xingjian? What's that on his back?" They were too far away from Fang Xingjian and the others, and could not hear the conversation between Fang Xingjian and the others. They only saw that after Fang Xingjian had stabbed all of his long swords in the ground, he seemed to be in a standoff with his teammates. Fang Xingjian shook his head, waved at the others, and said with a smile, "Come, I'll wipe you guys out first, then head to the competition." The next moment, his eyes shone brightly, and the ground under his feet was suddenly broken by a huge force. With a flash, he appeared before Barbara. Barbara only had time to turn her body slightly, her hand reaching for the bow on her back. But in the next moment, Fang Xingjian had already appeared and knocked her out with the sword hilt. "Stop! Fang Xingjian, are you crazy?" Ferdinand, Jack, Robert, and the others bellowed in unison. Other than Anthony, Jack, and Robert, the others attacked with their spears, fists, palms, and swords, surrounding Fang Xingjian from all directions. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.